Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news. Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more. The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good Friday morning from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York City. To our worldwide audience, we are streaming live on YouTube as well. So head over to youtube.com, search Bloomberg Podcast, and that's where you'll find us. Tom Keene is out today, taking a well-deserved rest day. David Gura, Bloomberg News.
Glad to be back.
How good does that get? David Gura sitting in the power chair of Tom Keene, going to be with us for the next 3 years. Lots coming up here today. We got some economic data coming out. We got the University of Michigan data coming out at 10 o'clock. We'll have that for you as well. Aneeka Gupta, Director, Macroeconomic Research. She's going to kick it off for us at WisdomTree, get her thoughts on these markets. Lisa Mateo on newspapers, the newspaper segment coming back today, which is a huge, of course. By popular demand. Lisa Pendergrast, CRE Finance Council's Executive Director, talks about the state of commercial real estate and the threats of the office market here. How much lower does the office real estate market go? There's a lot coming up here as well. We got futures a little bit higher here today. The S&P up about 0.2%. Same for the Dow and the NASDAQ. Feels like it's going to be kind of a quiet Friday here as we gear up for this election. We're right smack in the middle of earnings season as well, and we'll break down some of those earnings as they hit the tape. But right now, let's go to Lisa Mateo and get a Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa.
And we've got green on the screen as we close out a really busy week of earnings. We're already hearing from a few companies. Want to get to Colgate-Palmolive right now. Their shares up 2%, but a beat on organic sales. New York Community Bank Corp, they're up about 0.2%. Third quarter total deposits, well, that beat estimates. Also expecting to hear from Spirit Airlines and Hertz. We'll keep you posted on that. Right now, we have NASDAQ futures up 0.1%, 39 points. Dow futures up 70 points. We have S&P futures up about 11. We have the 2-year yield, 4.06%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.19%, and that's down 1 basis point as well. Commodities, oil, right now resuming its advance after a 2-day drop. We have Brent crude at $74 a barrel, up about 0.6%. WTI crude, $70 a barrel. We have spot gold down about 0.5% at $2,722 an ounce. Over to shares of Capri Holding getting hit hard, down 47%. Here's the reason why. Federal judge blocked its planned $8.5 billion takeover by rival retail Tapestry. We've been hearing about it, so it has been blocked. Tapestry, though, up about 16%. And then shares of Boeing, we talked about it for the past few days. Workers' strike drags on, pensions in focus. Their shares right now up about 0.2%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene. David, what are you looking at these days? I mean, I know you're focused pretty closely on the election coming up here, but I just can't see anything moving anywhere. Let's just get to it.
Yeah, I'm supposed to go to Wisconsin next week, of course, a swing state and one that Donald Trump is polling well in. Again, it's all within the margin of error on our Bloomberg Morning Consult poll, but I'm supposed to go to some campaign events there, talk to some voters, which I've been unable to do in recent weeks, so I'll report back. But I am, like you, kind of getting the sense that things are pretty calcified, stuck in the way that they are. We see these big events, trying to get people to get to the polls, turn in their mail-in ballots, but I'll go in search of the phantom undecided voter. Let's see if I can find any of them while I'm out there on that.
All right, very good. We'll send you to Wisconsin. Very good. All right, David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube, so check us out there. Let's check in with Aneeka Gupta. She's the Director, Macroeconomic Research at WisdomTree. Aneeka, as you sit back here and think about these markets here, what are some of the key drivers for you? Is it the Fed? Is it the economy? Is it corporate earnings? What are you thinking about here?
I think it's a combination of the three. I think we've moved from this Goldilocks period of progress on disinflation, helping to drive further monetary easing, and I think that's taken a bit of a stop, especially in the U.S. since we've received much stronger economic data. We're now beginning to see that benefit from lower risk premia being offset by rising bond yields. And that's based essentially because investors are now reducing the amount of expected Fed rate cuts. And that's having an impact on equity markets. And obviously, the market does also remain on tender hooks because we have the upcoming U.S. elections, and they're trying to figure out whether these improving odds of a Trump victory, actually do come to fruition.
No shortage of things for investors to worry about, Aneeka. And at the top of the show, Paul mentioned that gold has come in a little bit, but still at 27.33. We've seen it hit records here almost day after day. How are you thinking about gold, and what do you see as driving that asset? Is it simply maybe not fear, but concern about the election outcome? Is it something more than that?
Over the past month, we've seen a strong, discorrelation between the US dollar and gold alongside real yields and gold. So despite the fact that the dollar has strengthened, despite the fact that real yields have increased, gold still continues to attain multiple record highs. And that's because we're seeing a lot of strength on the physical market. So we're actually seeing central banks increase their purchases of gold. We're seeing, investors increase their purchases in gold. And that's been, one of the big drivers. Now, since the Russia-Ukraine war, we actually saw flows into gold-linked ETFs decline. But since June, we've had about 13 consecutive weeks of inflows into gold-related ETFs actually increase. So that's been a new catalyst in the horizon driving gold prices. And I think the overarching reason for why investors are, flocking towards gold is primarily because of rising geopolitical risks. With the tensions in the Middle East still not looking like they've subsided, and at the same time we have, the U.S. elections, the upcoming U.S. elections, and that is also, triggering a lot of volatility.
All right, so let's focus on the U.S. equity market, Aneeka. We've seen this a market that's been kind of driven by, great performance out of a handful of stocks called the Magnificent Seven and so on and so forth. There's a lot of folks that say that that's not really healthy for the market. Are you concerned about that lack of breadth, or how do you think about this U.S. equity markets just in general?
Yeah, we still remain positive. We expect, obviously the bar has been lowered for Q3 earnings season. We're now looking at average earnings growth of around 4%. However, if we look ahead, a lot of that margin expansion for the S&P 500 is primarily being driven by the technology sector as well as the communication sector. I mean, for technology, it's accounting for around 18% earnings growth for 2025 and 15% for communication services. So they are going to be the key drivers for earnings going forward. And I think given the fact that the bar is already so low for Q3, we expect quite a few companies to actually meet or exceed that bar, which should drive performance higher.
We've listened to a lot of interviews this week from our colleagues in Washington as the IMF and World Bank meetings take place, and Christine Lagarde, the ECB president, was one of them who came through our studios and spoke with Francine Lacqua. And something that she said, President Lagarde said, is that she's confident in the direction the ECB is taking here, given what we're seeing in Germany and Italy. Germany on pace for yet another year of contraction. Are there opportunities in Europe right now, and where do you see them? Are there equities opportunities in Europe as you see them?
Absolutely. I think the pessimism towards Europe is overstated. We already saw the IFO numbers today for Germany, show a slight upward trajectory, very different from what we've been seeing over the past few months for the greater part of this year. The key opportunity right now is in the small cap segment for European equities. That's because earnings for European small caps, and within the small caps, primarily a tilt towards a value, is showing more than a 16% earnings growth rise over the prior year. And if you compare that to MSCI Europe, which is representing more of the large cap segment of the market, we're looking at earnings expectation actually down 8%. So the opportunity is primarily in the small cap space, tilted towards more value oriented sectors, and that's because the small caps were the most penalized when rates rose at such a sharp pace, And now that we're going to see a much sharper unwind of easing from Europe as opposed to the US, that's going to asymmetrically benefit the smaller cap segment of the market in comparison to the large cap.
Aneeka, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate getting a few minutes of your time. Aneeka Gupta, she's the director of Macroeconomic Research for the Equities and Commodities business at WisdomTree. She is in London, 1 King William Street, which is literally right around the corner from the Bloomberg headquarters in London at Queen Victoria Street, right in the city of London. The city of London is like their Wall Street of New York. So the Wall Street of New York, the city of London.
There you go. And that building, I encourage everyone to go visit. There's a museum downstairs, but a beautiful European headquarters we have there.
Absolutely.
In the city of London.
With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul, David, and Lisa. 11 days are left before Election Day. Vice President Kamala Harris held a campaign rally in Clarkston, Georgia, that also featured appearances by former President Barack Obama, singer, songwriter Bruce Springsteen, and actor, filmmaker Tyler Perry. During her speech, Harris described what she sees as the difference between her approach to the presidency and that of her Republican opponent, Donald Trump.
One is focused on the past and himself. The other, ours, focused on the future and you.
Today, Harris will team up with superstar Beyonce during a campaign stop in Texas. Former President Donald Trump heads to Austin, Texas today for remarks at an airport hangar. Last night, Trump promised to call Russian President Putin on election night, as well as Ukrainian President Zelensky to try and stop the war.
On the evening of November 5th, I will call Putin, I will call Zelensky. I said, we got to stop it. I'm going to try and get it done as president-elect.
The former president spoke at a rally in Las Vegas. Eric and Lyle Menendez are being recommended for resentencing with the eligibility for parole for the 1989 murders of their parents. Los Angeles County District Attorney George Gascon says he's recommending their release under California's youthful parole law.
I am recommending that they be released because I believe that the people that they were at age 19 and 21 is not the same people that we're seeing 35 years later.
Defense lawyer Mark Garagos represents the brothers.
These boys need to come home, and today is a monumental victory on that path.
The brothers said they feared their parents were about to kill them to stop people from finding out that Jose Menendez had sexually abused Eric Menendez for years. A judge will need to go along with the Gascon recommendation, and then a parole board must approve it. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Paul, David, Lisa.
Michael Barr, what would you pay to get into Yankee Stadium to see the World Series
I'll just preface this by saying it's outrageous.
It's sure in the devil won't be $20,000 to get in there.
That's what I'm reading. The Bloomberg News has got an article out today. Yankee tickets at $20,000 highlight record-setting World Series. Now, Lisa Mateo, I know you've already got
worst seats are like $1,500.
I was about to say for standing room only, it's
standing room only.
And that's in the parking lot.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, it's just
use a periscope and watch
the amazing kind of what's happening here, kind of the build-up here.
I just $20,000, folks. If you just take your money, throw it up in the air, and then take a blowtorch and then do this.
Well, my brother-in-law just bought tickets in L.A. for the game too, $1,500,
Wow.
and that's like in the 300.
Really, for L.A. Okay.
For L.A.
All right,
which is cheaper than
it's big.
New York.
It's big. It's
fly to L.A.
Yankees,
and get the
tickets.
tickets.
It's the Dodgers. Yeah. It's the World Series. Great time of year for sports. We're gonna have more coming up. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by IBKR with Interactive Brokers Forecast Trader. You can trade your views on the 2024 elections. Just answer yes or no. Visit ibkr.com/forecast and get started today. All right, we have futures getting started. They're advancing right now with the S&P 500 up about 0.2%, suggesting it could trim its first weekly drop in 7. Right now we have Dow futures up 0.2%. NASDAQ futures, same there, up about 40 points. We have the 2-year yield, 4.06%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.19%, and that's down 1 basis point. Shares of Mercedes down 1% in Germany. Its quarterly car-making margin fell 4.7%, undershooting its minimum target. That was due to some competition in China. And cognac maker Rémy Cointreau slashed its annual guidance. Shares down 0.6%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. Right now, we're going to go to a conversation with Bloomberg Television's Lisa Bromwich. She sits down with Citi's chair, John Dugan. Let's take a listen.
During the financial crisis. John, thank you so much for being with us. I want to start with this idea that there just are so many unknowns, whether it's regulation, whether it's trade policy, whether it's tariffs. How much are people in the banking industry somewhat paralyzed?
I don't think so. I'll give you a good example. Our trading business, this can be a very good time of the year because there's volatility as there's uncertainty. And when there's volatility, that's good for our markets business. On the other hand, there are other businesses, if you're an investment banker, these 2 weeks leading up to the election are not likely to be active in the deal space. But this too shall pass, and people are navigating it and just looking ahead to see how they will navigate it.
One of the levels of uncertainty is just how bifurcated are the scenarios depending on whether Kamala Harris wins or whether Donald Trump wins. And if you could just bring us into a window of Citigroup's thinking of what the parameters are. You know, what's the sort of base case in the extreme case if Kamala Harris gets into office, and what about with Donald Trump?
So I think if Kamala Harris gets into office, we can expect more of a continuation of the policies that we've seen under Joe Biden, although it could be that it would be a little bit more business friendly because we may have a Republican Senate. And that's the conventional wisdom now. And that means nominations in order to get through the Senate are going to have to be a little bit more negotiation with the Republicans, and that could change the makeup of the people who get through. So that's a more modest change, I think. On the other hand, if Donald Trump wins the election, there will be very significant changes to personnel, and that could change the whole nature of who our regulators are and how we operate. And that's an unknown, but it will be very different. It's a little difficult to plan for because we don't know exactly what that would mean.
Typically, less regulation, a lot of people think of as a positive for banks, that allows them to be more profitable. Citi is in a unique position because you are a global bank that really does benefit from trade and from the free flow of cash between different economies. How would Citigroup really rearrange if free trade is impeded, if you do get a real restructuring with tariffs and other protectionist measures?
Yeah, I think the way we look at it is, yes, it is true that globalization has benefited Citi because we're in 100 countries on the ground and do business in another 50. But the fact of the matter is, if people change from being in a lot of countries to being somewhat fewer countries and changing and figuring out how to change those supply chains, we are in a very good position to assist people as they make those changes, because we have people on the ground in the places they're going to and the places they're coming from. And so we see that as business opportunities. That's the kind of thing we navigate all the time.
How much do you see Donald Trump really differing in terms of regulation when it comes to antitrust and some of the banking capital oversights, especially given some of the commentary that we've heard from his vice presidential running mate with respect to the current FTC leadership? And I ask this because I have to be honest, I was with a banker when that news dropped about Capri and Tapestry, and he was just beside himself. He couldn't believe that this was sort of the framework with affordable luxury handbags. I'm just wondering if that is sort of the expected norm going forward for you.
I think the way I would put it, I think there's an expectation that there will be more transactions and more deals that will get done, and that's a positive thing for our deal business. And so we would look forward to that. If it doesn't happen that way, we will not navigate the other side.
So 10 days ago, Citigroup came out with earnings, and it showed that it was seeing strength in a lot of the different 5 business lines as it streamlined things. It was a beat across the board, really good. Shares popped, and then Jane Fraser got on the phone and with analysts, and someone asked her about a possible asset cap, about whether potentially there could be some implementation. And she hesitated, and the shares plunged. And then she clarified, no, there is no asset cap, and there is not any plans for any kind of asset cap. And yet the shares still fell on that day. How frustrating was that for you?
Very frustrating, because she did clarify it within minutes of the uncertainty around it. And what she said is absolutely clear. There is no asset cap. We don't have an expectation for an asset cap. And our business performance was really very strong in the third quarter. So it's a bit of a mystery, and yes, it was frustrating.
How does Citigroup get out from under this regulatory cloud that seems to be sort of increasing a lot of skepticism in investors?
We have to make progress slowly and surely every quarter in making proof points of doing what we say we're going to do business-wise. So, for example, in the third quarter, as we had committed to, our revenues were up on 3% on an ex-divestiture basis. Our expenses were down 2%, operating leverage increasing in each of those 5 business lines. Those are the kinds of things that we got to keep doing to show that we're making progress towards our medium-term targets of an 11 to 12% return on tangible common equity.
Where is Citigroup in this transition to streamlining these 5 businesses right now?
I think we're in a very good, very exciting place. I think the board is quite excited about how the company is doing as measured by those 5 businesses, which, by the way, is much more transparent now. You can see it much more. There's a removal of a layer between the board and Jane and those businesses. They're much more accountable because it's so transparent about how they're doing it. And we saw some very exciting things in the third quarter. I'll mention 3 of them. The Apollo credit deal, $25 billion deal, very innovative. We had the largest deal transaction with the Mars acquisition of Kellanova that was announced, where we were the sole advisor. And we had a very exciting deal with MasterCard to tap into their international debit network. And these are the kinds of things where Citi really is getting on its front foot in each of these businesses.
How much are you thinking about another deal like the Apollo one?
Well, it's early days on Apollo. I think, as I said, we're quite excited. We think that really gives us the ability to offer a whole range of things to clients that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do, and that's the important piece. Let us see how it goes before we go down another path.
As a global bank, are you still sort of emphasizing that global reach at a time where everyone's looking at the U.S. and saying, it looks pretty good over there?
Still a lot of business going on all over the world. We're there to help people in their be the preeminent bank for companies with cross-border needs. They may have different cross-borders that they're using and cross-border needs, but we're there to help them for exactly that.
John Dugan, wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for being with us. That was John Dugan, the chair of Citigroup's board. And John, I'm going to send it back to you.
All right, that was Bloomberg Television's Lisa Brahman. She's down in Washington, D.C., chatting with Citi Chair John Dugan, talking about the Citigroup. I mean, I'm looking at the stock here. You know, they had a good quarter, like a lot of the big investment banks had this quarter. They had their capital markets business, again, across Wall Street was pretty strong, Citi's as well. The stock's up 22%. I worked there back in the day, and what I loved about Citi is they are just everywhere. And they're in every single business. And that, from an investor standpoint, that's the problem. They're everywhere. And I think Jane Fraser is really kind of focusing on where do we generate the best returns on our capital, and that's where we want to be. So, for example, one of the areas they pulled back from is municipal bond underwriting, which was a core business of Citi for 100+ years, but she said the returns on allocated capital just aren't there.
Pulling back on its geographic footprint as well, and I heard John Dugan talk about how they still want to be seen as kind of a bank that can help companies around the world, but just an interesting conversation there about this confusion over an asset cap around those earnings. John Dugan allowing that it was very frustrating to see that stock price sink on the heels of its latest earnings, and then Lisa asking about the regulatory cloud overhanging Citi still, and John Dugan saying we have to make progress, show progress every quarter. Good interview there. Yeah, another one of many from the IMF annual meetings there in Washington.
Exactly right. So Lisa Brahman's down in Washington, D.C., talking to John Dugan, the chair of Citigroup. Looking at the futures market here, the S&P's up about 12, Dow up 76, NASDAQ up 45. We'll have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures pointing to a higher open right now on Wall Street. Investors looking past that jump in borrowing costs, that kind of cooled market sentiment earlier this week. Speaking of sentiment, we'll get a read on that today from the University of Michigan, as well as durable goods orders. Next week, traders turn to the monthly payrolls report for more clues on interest rate cuts. Right now, we have NASDAQ futures down up 0.2%, 43 points. Dow futures up 72 points. S&P futures up 12. The two-year yield, 4.06%. That's down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.19%. That's down 1 basis point. Bitcoin down about 0.3% at around 67,000. We have shares of Apple down nearly 1%, and this is after it was downgraded by KeyBank as it questions its growth expectations. And we have some executive news. Morgan Stanley CEO Ted Pick becoming chairman of the board in January, replacing James Gorman, who has been named chair of the board at Walt Disney. Now, Elon Musk's wealth, it soared after those blowout earnings from Tesla. It helped add $33.5 billion to his net worth yesterday. His total fortune, drum roll, brings it to more than $270 billion. Just in case you're keeping score, that's 61 ahead of Jeff Bezos. 61 billion ahead of Jeff Bezos. Wow. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
I mean, Rich Go, R-I-C-H. Literally, we have a function on the Bloomberg terminal that just lists, and it is, in fact, I think, the best calculation of the net worth of the wealthiest people in the world. I mean, it used to be the Forbes, but this goes into serious detail and values pretty much everything you can think of. And again, Elon Musk, as Lisa was saying, is number one at $270 billion. But what I like is like the change year to date. Who's had the best year to date? The best year to date improvement in one's wealth, Jensen Huang at NVIDIA of $78.6 billion. Nice.
And the beauty and simplicity of the function belies the fact that there's just a huge team working on this. And the work they do is incredible, kind of piecing together based on assets they hold and what they've done, sort of how much money folks have. And it's incredible, detailed work they do. So yeah, Rich Go, very cool function.
Right. And for those of us on global Wall Street, we kind of think about money. So it makes sense that we have a function called Rich Go. Joe Mathieu joins us here, Balance of Power host. He's down in Washington, D.C. He is hip deep in all that is going on both of these campaigns here. Joe, it looks like the Democrats are kind of trying to rely on some star power. But for me, I was just mentioning to David Gura, Joe, the star power thing, whether it's my boy Bruce Springsteen or whether it's Beyonce, I mean, does that even, it's almost like that's so 1990s or 2000s. I mean, is that even relevant anymore, do you think?
Well, I guess it depends who you invite, but there's no evidence to suggest that celebrity endorsements move the needle when it comes to polling. But look, we're in a tied race. You saw Bloomberg's swing state survey yesterday, 49-49. Did you see today, Siena College, New York Times, 48-48. This is as tied up as it gets. So the campaigns are trying anything they can. And yeah, Kamala Harris is surrounding herself with some pretty heavy celebrity. Willie Nelson's going to be up there tonight as well. He had a big cannabis for Kamala thing the other. I don't know if that helps either, but
surprise there.
Yeah, no surprise at all. Donald Trump is doing it himself, right? You got Eminem for Kamala Harris. You got Kid Rock for Donald Trump. He's going to be with Joe Rogan. He was with Tucker Carlson the night before. Everybody's grabbing whomever they think has an audience. That goes for influencers and all these podcasters getting interviews because they're flailing, guys. They're throwing whatever they can at the wall to try to beat each other by what will be probably less than a point if these polls are true.
Joe, let's talk a bit about the rally that was held in Atlanta yesterday. So yes, Bruce Springsteen was there. President Obama was there as well with Kamala Harris, the first time the two of them appeared on the trail together. The campaign saying this is the largest crowd that they've had for a rally yet. I think 23,000 people in that venue. What was the message? What is the message from the Harris campaign? Let's start there with 11 days to go until Election Day. Is it simply focused on making sure you get to the polls, but more so than that, voting early if you can?
There's a lot of that. And, look, there's I don't know that they have crystallized a closing message. Both sides have really just been kind of shooting from the hip, and we've seen these messages evolving. Here's the best I'll do for you. What we're hearing from the Harris campaign. He has an enemies list. We have a to-do list. That's one we're hearing a lot about. But also, going back to this threat to democracy idea that Joe Biden, frankly, never really connected on. And a lot of people are wondering why Kamala Harris isn't talking more about the economy. than democracy. She's going to be back in Washington next week, 1 week before the election on Tuesday, standing on the ellipse, where we all remember Donald Trump holding that speech and that rally on January 6th to try to bring people back to that moment. So I think there are a lot of different closing arguments coming from both campaigns. Last night, Tyler Perry, Samuel L. Jackson, Spike Lee, I could keep going with the names. They all got up to the podium to reinforce those points.
Joe, a lot of folks are saying that what's going to be really key to this election is getting out the vote and participation. What do we know about maybe turnout? What do we think turnout's going to be in this election?
Probably an all-time high based on what we're seeing. The campaign certainly hopes so. And I'm saying that because of just the incredible closeness in the race, the amount of engagement that we're seeing, but also the early voting has been setting records. And it's been setting records in states that have not always been, fully leaning into early voting, with Republicans specifically in states like Arizona pulling ballots more often than Democrats are. So there's a bit of noise out there, but I can tell you guys, people are voting early in person, by absentee, by mail. And that's also going to be a big reason why we have to wait a long time before this race is called. I mean, we're really going out of our way to warn our viewers and listeners that it could be days, if not a week, before we know. Wow.
Joe, we've talked a lot about the role Elon Musk is playing in Pennsylvania in particular, and there was this blockbuster piece in the Wall Street Journal that dropped last night indicating that Elon Musk has talked repeatedly, continues to talk, I think it alleged, with Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia. Walk us through the implications of that. So we've got Elon Musk, who's reportedly in regular contact with the Russian president, Donald Trump, who's reportedly in regular contact with the Russian president. And I don't need the reportedly here when I say that these two men are talking to each other all the time. Elon Musk and Donald Trump are. Walk us through why this is such a significant story. Again, this is something the journalists reported. We haven't confirmed, but certainly made some seismic waves over the course of the night.
Well, look, I mean, goes back to what Donald Trump likes to call Russia, 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 suggesting that this was all a hoax, the idea that he was colluding somehow with Russia or Vladimir Putin, or at least enjoying the benefits of some interference. We know that his relationship is something that has rubbed people the wrong way. He says that it's a good thing, that it in fact strengthens our nation to have a leader with relationships with other world leaders. But look, we don't really have to go to the degrees of separation here. If it's Elon Musk, Donald Trump, and Vladimir Putin in a triangle of communication, that's a big deal. Elon Musk, according to these reports, in fact, was asked to do a favor by Vladimir Putin and not turn on the Starlink satellite service over Taiwan as a favor to Xi Jinping. So, it's not like they're trading recipes on the phone here, guys. This actually could have major geopolitical implications.
Wow. What do we know, Joe, about down ballot? I'm kind of thinking about, we really have to get a handle on who's going to be in the House, who's going to be in the Senate. What's the thinking within D.C. these days?
The conventional wisdom for some time, and I don't think it's any different right now, is that the Senate flips from Democrat to Republican, the House flips from Republican to Democrat, and then we'll see what happens in the White House. Okay. Both are, of course, dealing with such thin majorities that it wouldn't take a lot for either to happen. This is a tough map for Democrats in the Senate this year. There's some very difficult races when you look across the swing states in particular, whether we're talking about Pennsylvania. Ohio's a big one with Sherrod Brown. Wisconsin, the Senate race has us wondering if Democrats can keep the majority. The House, it would take 4 seats essentially to flip here, but it's going to take some time. We might actually know the Senate on election night, and I don't want to predict that, but there's a good chance that we will, or the following morning. The House is going to take some time. It's states like New York, and more specifically states out west, California, that are going to take probably days to count. And when we're only talking about a couple of seats here, it's ironic to think that we will have to wait days to know who controls the House of Representatives. But look, we're coming up to New York, guys. I don't think they're letting us go home until all this stuff is called. So we're going to experience this together.
Paul, Joe bringing up that Senate race in Ohio, and just the amount of money that's been poured into that race in particular is just so extraordinary. I think we've become kind of inured to how much money is fueling all of these campaigns and races. Joe, you mentioned you're coming to New York. Donald Trump is coming here as well on Sunday. He's going to be at Madison Square Garden. Elon Musk reportedly is going to be there as well. We've talked a lot about the Harris messaging that we heard in Atlanta, that we're going to hear in Houston, where she goes today. What has his messaging been? And so you mentioned those House races here in New York. My guess, my sense is that's aside from the kind of ego boost of playing Madison Square Garden for Donald Trump, that's the importance of him coming here to kind of see if he can wrest some of those House seats away from Democrats in New York.
Well, that's one way to look at it. I'm not sure that has any reason to do with why he's actually going. To your point, he wanted to play Madison Square Garden. And look, it might be a smart strategy. He's going to get all kinds of coverage. Yeah, Elon will be there. Even Mike Johnson on stage. Can you imagine a year ago telling Mike Johnson he was going to be playing Madison Square Garden?
That's something else,
But yeah, it's a big deal. I keep conjuring up images of Led Zeppelin, and I think I'm showing my age here because nobody I sit with in my row has ever heard of the song Remains the Same. And they keep telling me, no, it's Billy Joel. He wants to be Billy Joel. Everybody wants to play Madison Square Garden. So they're going to pay $1 million to do it, by the way. They're basically renting the place out. And I'll be honest, with the amount of coverage that will probably generate, I suspect it'd be worth a lot more than $1 million. So maybe it's not that silly.
Not bad. Playing the Garden. Why not? Joe Mathieu, thank you so much. Joe Mathieu, he is the host of Balance of Power. He is in Washington, D.C. He is right in the middle of it. We appreciate getting a few minutes of his time. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul. David, Lisa, former President Donald Trump says China's leader will bully Vice President Kamala Harris like a baby if she is elected. Trump held a rally last night in Las Vegas.
And I'd like to begin by asking a very simple question. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? I don't think so. What do you think? No way.
Meanwhile, Kamala Harris was joined by former President Barack Obama during a campaign stop near Atlanta. He took aim at those saying they remember the economy under former President Trump.
I've heard people say this, right? I'll talk to them. Why would you think about voting for this guy? Well, I remember the economy when he first came in. It was pretty good. Yeah, it was good because it was my economy.
Vice President Harris is teaming up with Beyonce for a rally today in Texas. Los Angeles County District Attorney George Gascon has recommended resentencing for brothers Lyle and Eric Menendez, who are each serving life in prison without parole for the murders of their parents back in 1989.
I believe that they were molested, but the decision that was made today, it really has to do more with the resentencing laws in the state of California.
D.A. Gascon's recommendation is going to go before the judge, and then we'll make a determination. Gaza health officials say an Israeli strike has killed 38 people in Khan Yunis. This morning's strike comes as Israel's military ratchets up offensives in Lebanon and Gaza, where strikes have continued despite international pressure for a ceasefire and growing worries about supply shortages. Earlier today, an Israeli airstrike on a compound housing journalists in southeast Lebanon killed 3 media staffers. A second batch of North Korean troops will head to Russia soon. That's according to South Korean intelligence documents shared with allies and seen by Bloomberg News. A first group of 1,500 elite special forces troops already undergoing training in Russia's Far East as part of a planned deployment of about 10,000 North Korean soldiers. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Paul, David, Lisa.
All right, Michael and David, talk about the business of sports here. This is from Sportico, our good friends that were former Bloomberg News folks. Based on disclosures and bond documents showing Yankees revenue back to 1997, the World Series probably will generate an additional $70 million, 7-0, in ticket and luxury suite revenue on top of the regular season. How significant is that number? It's nearly equal to what the team paid sluggers Aaron Judge, $40 million, and Juan Soto, $31 million in combined salary this season. So big business is the World Series, Michael.
In other words, they'll make way more than the entire payroll of the Detroit Tigers.
The Detroit Tigers, exactly.
That ain't hard.
18.8 million, folks.
Exactly right. So you think about the money here, the postseason. It's, obviously we always think about the media rights fees, the TV stuff, but selling tickets, and popcorn,
sweets and all of that,
soda and hot dogs and all that kind of stuff. It all adds up for the teams here. So Yankee Stadium in the Bronx, Chavez Ravine in L.A. It's going to be some pretty good fun over the next 10 days or so. We'll have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have futures advancing in early trading to end off the week. We have NASDAQ futures up 0.3%, 74 points. Dow futures up 0.2%, 100 points. We have S&P futures up 0.2%, or 17 points. The 2-year yield, 4.05%. That's down 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.19%. That's down 2 basis points. Over to commodities, we have Brent crude up about 0.6%, $74 a barrel. WTI crude, $70 a barrel. We have spot gold down about 0.3% at $2,727 an ounce. Bitcoin, want to point it out, down about 0.2%, around 68,000. Shares of Capital One up 4%. That's after an earnings beat for the bank that's looking to acquire Discover. And then you have shares of Spirit Airlines up about 7%. This is after word that it plans to sell some of its jets to boost cash as it nears a possible bankruptcy filing. About how many planes? Well, apparently 23 Airbus aircraft for $519 million. And finally, Dish's creditors. They told DirecTV attorneys that a merger proposal asking them to take on almost $1.6 billion loss is, quote, unworkable. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Dave.
Tale as old as time, Paul. This is a long,
Charlie Ergen,
story.
I don't know what happened with Charlie Ergen. I've followed him for 35 years. He's made money for equity investors and his creditors for years, but boy, the last 10 years have been brutal.
Tough,
Everybody questions his decisions. Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. David Gura, Paul Sweeney, we're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. Tom taking the day off. Here's another thing. It's tough to be an M&A banker today because I don't think I can get anything done. A federal judge blocked Tapestry's $8.5 billion acquisition of Capri Holdings, citing harm to competition in the, quote, accessible luxury handbag market. Are you kidding me?
Accessible?
I don't know.
That means it's kind of affordable.
If I'm an M&A banker, I don't know what to say. I don't think I can get anything done here today. So the regulators are really taking a heavy hand across a variety of industries, so we'll keep an eye on that.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
All right, folks, your daily look at the front pages around the world is brought to you by IBKR. Financial advisors, switch to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost global trading and turnkey custody solutions. No ticket charges and no conflicts of your interest at ibkr.com/RIA. Lisa Mateo, what do you have for us today?
All right. Well, since David Gura is here, our political guru, okay, so I found this story. Swing state voters apparently suffering from political ad fatigue. They are tired of it. Residents in the 7 battleground states, they've been hit with, the lawn signs, the billboards, the TV ads. But on top of that, they're getting the digital ads, social media. It's in their scroll. They're getting text messages. I know you've said you've gotten text messages.
It's now like 10 a day.
Do you get a lot of the Pennsylvania stuff?
No, I just get 10 a day, mostly from Democrats, the party, for money.
Okay.
It's only 15 minutes
somebody's
left for
list.
somebody. I was like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
I know, but you're right, Pennsylvania.
So I want to ask Apple. So I always hit the delete and report the spam. Doesn't stop.
Doesn't matter, no.
Doesn't matter.
We'll work around that.
Yep.
Block the number.
Should I do that?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right.
I've done
so
that.
I'll figure that out. All right.
Although another number will probably come.
Yes.
But
exactly.
that's it.
But I mean, I just, I used to cover the television industry, and every 2 years when there's an election cycle, the TV stations make just gobs of money on political advertising, and it's a godsend to them. But it's not good if you're a viewer in those states.
No, and those states are just saying they're tired of it. They're done. I'm wondering if it's going to make them want to push not to vote.
Have the opposite effect, right? They're just tired out. Irritated. I can see that.
Yeah. So that was the thing over there. Okay, so we've been hearing the story about the E. coli with McDonald's and the Quarter Pounder. So now the restaurant industry is on this high alert. So you have other restaurants starting to do this. Burger King, Young Brands, a parent of Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, KFC, they removed the onions because that has been said to be linked to the E. coli outbreak. They're pulling the onions from their burgers. Also, Fat Brands that owns Johnny Rockets, other restaurants, they're doing the same thing. They're stopped using those Taylor Farm onions. But it can be costly for some of these companies. You remember the Chipotle outbreak? It cost them about $25 million, it says, to settle criminal charges related to outbreaks. breaks.
And it can last so long. I mean, it's a weight on the McDonald's stock now, obviously, but you look at Chipotle, that lasted for years. I feel like it was
What's your go-to meal at Mickey D's?
It actually is the quarter pounder with cheese, which I guess I can't get now in several states across the country.
It's a number 2 with a Coke. See, I'm a nasty.
Oh, you know the numbers.
Yeah. It's a number. It's been my order since I was like 14.
Is that right?
A number 2 with a Coke.
Some comfort in that.
There is. Yeah. Exactly. Same thing with Hoagie Haven in Princeton. Cheesesteak hoagie, no tomatoes, but everything else.
Do you supersize it? That's the question.
No, please.
Everything in moderation.
Yeah,
for Paul.
Exactly. Exactly. That's right. I mean, I go to McDonald's maybe once a year. I used to do. I mean, traveling in airports, that was your excuse to then
you had to do it.
Mickey D's or Burger King, because you're in an airport, you're rushing for a flight. That was your excuse.
Sure.
Now they don't even have fast food in airports anymore. It's all this.
It's all the fancy restaurants.
So I don't know. They took that away from me. All right, what else?
Well, if you're feeling hungry, okay, so how about this? A hungry group of 10 people on Thanksgiving, you can feed them for $100.
Where?
Yes.
This is at Sam's Club.
Okay.
You gotta go to Sam's Club. It's their Members Mark brand. So for $100, you can get a whole turkey, dinner rolls, mac and cheese, mashed potatoes, sweet potato mash, Brussels sprouts salad, and pumpkin pie.
The whole thing.
They're saying it can be delivered to your house under 2 hours. It's pre-cooked. All you got to do is heat it up maybe in the oven. Everything is set to go. They want to just make sure everyone has, access to good food. That's the reason why they're doing it. But a lot of companies have been doing this whole promotion, like
Prepared
Thanksgiving
meal.
cheap meals, because budgets are tight.
What do you do on Thanksgiving? Are you driving
I go to
that
families.
bus?
No,
You
I go to families.
So
I don't
you
have
don't
to
host.
cook.
Good for
I bring
you.
the wine, and that's
You bring
about
the
it.
wine, exactly.
That's it.
I'll bring in the wine. That's a good strategy. All right, how about you, David? What do you guys do?
We'll be here in New York. Do some cooking, but it's farmed out among all of us. So I won't take care of the turkey, but we'll do some sides. And
day after Thanksgiving, I'm working. Anybody else?
Not me.
I should check my calendar.
Yeah,
I feel like Mr. Keene.
See, that's how I do.
Mr. Keene may have called that one earlier. I'm not sure.
Mr. Keene. So when I ask for all the Fridays off in the summer, I always tell the powers that be, hey, who's working the day after Thanksgiving?
Yes.
And
who's
Christmas
working
week,
Christmas
aren't you?
week?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Okay.
So that's how you play it there. All right. So, but Thanksgiving dinner for under $100, not bad.
Yeah, not bad for 10 people. There you go.
Yep.
Okay, we've been talking about the World Series, right? Fever's in the air, but this is actually in the Wall Street Journal. It's how ballpark condos are a big hit with homeowners. So they don't want the ocean view. They want the view of the ballpark. So that's becoming a big thing. Unfortunately, not in New York or Los Angeles. No. They don't have those. But in San Diego, for example, they have these residences where you can just sit out on your balcony and watch the game. It's right there.
I can beat that.
Okay, how?
1995, we did the IPO for Speedway Motor Sports. They own the Charlotte Motor Speedway, the Atlanta Motor Speedway. Use of proceeds to build condos at the Charlotte Motor Speedway.
Wow.
In turn 2. And people
Sounds
bought
loud
them.
to me.
And people bought them. They sold them out before they even built them. People wanted to have, they don't want traffic in front of their house, but they want 40 cars going 200 miles an hour in front of their condo at the Charlotte Motor Speedway.
I live next to a train station. It's horrible. Exactly. I don't want to live next to a speedway.
It was great. I mean, and so they, for 2 days a year when they have the two, what used to be the Winston Cup races.
Regular, right? Yeah.
And then and people paid like $500,000 for these things.
I was in D.C. before here, and the kind of growth that you've seen around the Nationals ballpark in Navy Yard in D.C., just like that, all those condos around there. And then Paul and I love to talk about Durham, North Carolina. But that minor league park, the Durham Bulls Athletic Park, has a lot of that now. A lot of condos kind of around the edges of it. So I get it. I mean, it's like, if you're a fan, and we've talked about how much it is to watch the World Series, maybe this is like the future is to do it this way.
So maybe it's cheaper to do it that way.
Yeah.
But they're not cheap either. I mean, some guy paid $1 million for his.
In San Diego?
In the San Diego, and that was back in 2007.
Wow.
So you can imagine how much it cost.
That's a great ballpark.
I've walked by it downtown, but never been inside. But it's
downtown San Diego system. It's a great. Why you would live anywhere other than San Diego?
Can't beat the temperature.
It's just awesome. But that's a great ballpark. I think they support the team, so we'll see. All right, that's our newspaper segment with Lisa Mateo. So I don't know. It's interesting here, David. I think the biggest question I have about the election is just when are we going to know? That's kind of my thing.
I've been calling around. So again, I'm going to go to Pennsylvania for the actual day itself, and probably a few days afterward. I've been talking to and communicating with elections officials there, and they're approaching it very carefully. But they're saying, if you look at the dashboards for each of these counties, they plan to update them with these unofficial numbers the night of. Polls close around 9. So I think we'll have some sense there, but I do feel like we're not going to get that official word for a few days at least.
Have we learned anything, I wonder, from the last time?
I think everyone's going to be on high alert and cautious. They don't want anything. They don't want anything to kind of creep out that anything's gone amiss, even if it hasn't. So I think people are going to be on. They're going to be vigilant. Let's say that.
We'll see. All right, we'll see. We'll be all over it, as you know, here at Bloomberg. Phil Collins, how about that? Let's bring it on.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Bloomberg Bloomberg Surveillance is brought to you by Cohn Resnick Advisory Assurance Tax. Discover game-changing strategies to maximize value, optimize performance, and manage risk. Put your business at the forefront. It is David Gura. It is sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Got a lot coming up here. We're going to check in with Dana Dioria at Investnet and get her thoughts on these markets. Lisa Pendergrass, she's a commercial real estate finance counsel, executive director. Talk to you about commercial real estate. I might even ask about office space. Have we hit bottom? When will we hit bottom? We'll check on Mathieu and all that political stuff. So a lot coming up in this hour. Futures slightly higher this morning. Got the S&P up about 15 points. Right now, let's go kick this whole hour off with Lisa Mateo on Bloomberg Business Flash.
You got him. We've got green on the screen, and this is as we close out a busy week of earnings. Today we've heard from Colgate-Palmolive. It was up about 2%. Now it's down about 1%. They did report a third quarter earnings beat. Then you have New York Community Bank Corp. It was up 0.2%, now down nearly 4%. Third quarter total deposits beat estimates, but we're also learning that third quarter credit losses provision that missed estimates. All right, so we have NASDAQ futures up 0.3%, 66 points. Dow futures up 85 points. S&P futures up 15 points. We have Brent crude $75 a barrel, WTI crude $70 a barrel. We have spot gold at $2,725 an ounce. Shares of Capri Holding now down 47%. That federal judge blocked the planned $8.5 billion takeover by Tapestry. Tapestry, you know, is Coach and Kate Spade. Tapestry up 15%. And shares of Boeing, they're up 0.2%. Worker strike still dragging on with pensions. That is in focus right now. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
I'm 60 years old. I don't know one person who has a pension, a defined benefit pension. It seems like it's something from my parents' generation.
Yeah.
So I'm surprised that the Boeing workers, that's an issue.
That's
for them.
what they want.
But I know it has historically been part of their compensation package. So
Lisa has a pension.
I do.
I saw her hand
You
go
have
up.
a pension?
Yeah.
Extra union for years.
Is that right?
Yes.
Good for you. I forgot. And that's you guys have a good
And that
union.
was it. Yeah. So that's
interesting.
That's
I mean,
it.
I just kind of grew up with your 401k and all.
Yeah,
that
no, it
stuff.
did feel like a vestige of generations past, and this Boeing thing is to call it a pickle is underselling it. I mean, that company is going through it.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a simple economic model. You got to crank out the planes, get them off the assembly line, ship them so you get the cash coming in from your customers.
And make sure the door doesn't fall off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
bonus,
it is tough. And as George Ferguson from Bloomberg Intelligence said, you can't just go hire people off the street to build these things.
That's right.
And it's not like building an automobile. There is an assembly line, but there are people crawling all over these planes, screwing this in there, soldering. It's really high touch manufacturing.
Your former colleague George, so good. I get his notes still. Such a shrewd and smart analyst on the aviation industry. But yeah, absolutely right.
George Ferguson, he was in Army intelligence, which just boggles the mind. You think about it. Although I did hire him. All right, let's check in. Let's talk about these markets here. Dana Dioria, she's the co-CIO of Investnet, joining us here. Dana, what are you telling your clients here? We're kind of smack in the middle of earnings season. We've got a Fed who's cutting interest rates. We're not sure how quickly they're going to continue to cut rates. What are you telling your clients here about the types of risk they should be taking in these markets?
Well, for the most part, our message is, stay steady hand, right? Don't try to react to what's going on in markets. And I think, certainly with the election so close, that's one of the places that folks are expecting volatility. But we're actually getting on the backside of the more volatile seasonality at any rate, right? September and October. And typically the rest of the year tends to look good. And we've got solid, I would say, economic information. Certainly unemployment falling now from 4.2 to 4.1. We're adding more jobs than we thought we would. It does look like we will stick this landing. So, to the extent that folks are nervous, and certainly we know that a lot of people are just plowing money into cash, our message to them is stay at your appropriate risk tolerance, stay invested in markets, don't miss out on, what the markets have to bear right now.
$6.5 trillion in cash on the sidelines. What do you do to compel them, yes, to understand and find a risk level that's something they can tolerate, but also compel them to move outside of cash at this moment?
Yeah, so, folks like us in the retail investor space have countless slides and studies and whatnot showing, hey, volatility subsides, the secular trend is up, if you miss the best 10 days in the market, that, you know, this is how much different your outcome will be years and years later. And it's a lot, right? We know stock markets deliver their returns in chunks. It's not like it's 10% year after year. You really have to be in the market to pick up the days that are really, really good. So we have a ton of information that we, you know, sort of send to clients and advisors that talk through with clients. But let's face it, at the end of the day, folks are just really excited that they're finally getting a return on cash. I mean, it just wasn't that long ago that, you know, cash bore nothing. And so you are sort of fighting against that. And then of course, as I say, the election, you know, worries about what could happen, and, you know, with markets as a result of that. I think those are all headwinds to people being invested. But, you know, it is the case, right? Look at the returns we've had in the markets the last couple of years at the same time that money market assets have been swelling dramatically.
Dana, we're kind of in the teeth of earnings season right now. We had a big week this week. What have you seen so far? Do you think earnings are kind of strong enough to continue to support this market?
Well, I do think they're coming in as expected, I would say. And when I say as expected, that means, you know, 79% of companies are actually beating estimates, right? But that's expected. So, you know, that's the sort of the space we're in. So we're getting the beats that, you know, we would expect. But at the same time, you know, we're not getting some blowaway surprises that I think would, you know, buoy the market even more, perhaps. Now, notwithstanding, you know, of course, some certain names have really delivered. So I think the earnings season is continuing apace, and it supports the stock market rally. I don't think it's, you know, I don't think you're seeing something that would suggest that things are much better than what the market has already priced in.
So earnings season continues apace. This has been kind of a light week for economic data. We're going to get this consumer sentiment survey from Michigan later today. Next week is big for the labor market. We're going to get JOLTS. We're going to get ADP. We're going to have jobs day at the end of the week. Obviously, we've seen the Fed pivot or shift its focus more wholly to the labor market. What are you watching for next week? We have a Fed here that's adamant that it's data-driven. There's a criticism it's data point-driven, perhaps. How pivotal are these releases going to be next week as we kind of plot our path forward and look at what the Fed's path forward is?
I think it's interesting. You know, I still thought it was interesting that the Fed did 50 in September. I didn't necessarily think that was warranted. I think they thought maybe they were behind a little from July. And what that brings up and what you're sort of raising is, you know, they're kind of reacting to the data as it comes in. We're seeing more revision in data, you know, lately. And so, you know, I think the 50 came pre-election. Now, of course, you know, we thought for a bit there, we thought 75 basis points for the rest of the year. Now that's tapered back to 50. I do think it will matter to the Fed. You know, at this point, we're right on top of the election. So whatever, you know, impact that's having is kind of there, right? But by the time they have to make more decisions. So I lean toward the Fed will be more cautious. Now, of course, we had 254,000 non-farm payrolls added in September, blowing out, you know, expectations, actually reducing unemployment, as I said. So, you know, that gives them a lot of power. It's given them a lot of power to stay steady on rates and not cut too fast. I think what would happen next week is you'd get a data point that puts that in a different light, that suggests that, well, actually, it's not as good as we thought, you know, expect a revision or something. So that would be the thing that would go against it. But I remain in the camp that, you know, maybe the Fed gave us this bazooka cut for timing or whatever it was. I'm in the camp of slower is probably smarter and probably what they will do.
Dana, how about the fixed income market here? I mean, I can park myself in a 2-year treasury, take no risk. I kind of trust my government to pay me back in 2 years. I can get 4.05%. Do I do that, or do I take some credit risk here?
So, I mean, of course, I'm going to tell you balanced portfolio, right? And that's definitely how we view it. I believe yield curve diversification makes sense typically. I've never been one to say, you know, the 60-40 is dead or doesn't make sense. I certainly think we can add diversifying elements to the 60-40. I think you're seeing alternatives that just heretofore were only available in certain parts of the market. You're very much seeing, it's funny, I was listening to your comments on the defined benefit and, nobody has it, right? Nobody has these pensions. Well, what's that resulting in? It's resulting in alternatives companies, private markets companies coming down market and figuring out innovative, interval funds, tender offer funds, solutions that the retail client can access. And so I do think, to your question on the fixed income, there are ways to diversify that standard 40% fixed income. But I'm still a proponent that you need that ballast in the portfolio, and having that piece of the pie and having that diversified across the yield curve makes sense.
Hey, Dana, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate getting your thoughts there. Dana Dioria, she's the co-CIO at InvestNet out there in Chicago. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul, David, Lisa. 11 days to go before Election Day. Both former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris were on the campaign trail as time runs out.
Donald Trump has become more confused, more unstable, and more angry.
Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? I don't think so.
Today, Vice President Harris will team up with superstar Beyonce for a rally in Texas. Yesterday, Harris teamed up with former President Barack Obama during a stop in Georgia. Meanwhile, Donald Trump made his way to Nevada and Arizona. Speaking about immigration, he compared the U.S. to a garbage can. President Vladimir Putin said Russia is open to a reasonable compromise but won't make any concessions to end its war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, a second batch of North Korean troops will head to Russia soon. That's according to South Korean intelligence documents shared with allies and seen by Bloomberg News. 3 American astronauts and a Russian cosmonaut are back on Earth after a successful splashdown for a SpaceX capsule in the Gulf of Mexico. Bloomberg's Kate Duffy reports the mission aboard the International Space Station lasted a bit longer than they had bargained for.
The science that they were doing on board the ISS is actually to improve astronaut health during long-duration space missions. And this really feeds into Elon Musk's narrative of getting more of humanity into space. But as you say, they did suffer a bit of delay. Actually, missions like this usually only last 6 months. This went on for another 2. And this was partly delayed by Hurricane Milton, as well as issues with Boeing's Starliner, which has caused a reshuffle in ferrying crew between the ISS and Earth.
Bloomberg's Kate Duffy reports the space station is now back to its normal crew size of 7, 4 Americans and 3 Russians. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Paul, David, Lisa.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you so much. We appreciate it. David, like most things in my life, I mailed it in.
You did?
I mailed in my voting. But now I'm thinking about
I did it yesterday.
Somebody has to physically open the envelope.
Yes.
And then enter it somehow into some systems. I mean, that doesn't seem like a 21st century technology. Or
Can you track? I saw there was a barcode on the back of it. Are we able to track? I'm not even knowing if in New York or New Jersey you can do it.
I don't know. But I thought I was being kind of cool and mailing it in. But now I'm thinking about it. That's probably the lowest tech
Old
way
school.
to vote.
Yes.
I mean, it's kind of weird walking into a booth in my local elementary school and pushing some buttons.
Yeah.
This seems even lower
Nothing
tech.
high tech about that.
So, but I don't know. I guess it all works. But if somebody tells me, hey, we don't know the vote because we're still opening the envelopes, I'm like, all right, I kind of get that, I guess.
I did get a sticker. I was impressed with that.
Oh, you did?
In the envelope,
It's like you gave blood. All right, we're going to have more coming up. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have futures advancing, and with the S&P 500 right now up about 0.3%, suggesting it could trim its first weekly drop in 7. Now, some analysts predicting a stock market boost if Donald Trump wins a presidential vote, while others warn it could ignite inflation and slow the pace of Fed easing. Then you have Bank of America strategists saying, well, as the U.S. election nears, faith in gold and AI stocks, that is growing. As far as the rest of futures, Dow futures down up 0.2%, 93 points. NASDAQ futures up 0.4%, 84 points. We have the 2-year yield, 4.06%. That's down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.19%, and that's down 1 basis point. Shares of Mercedes down 1% in Germany. Its quarterly car making margin, well, it fell about 4.7%. That was due to competition in China. And then we have French cognac maker Rémy Cointreau. Love that in my Cosmo as well. It slashed its annual sales guidance. Shares down more than 0.5% in Paris. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate it. We learned so much from Lisa every news report. That is great stuff. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. And we're also doing lots of other kind of stuff here. So what would you like to hear on Bloomberg Radio? Help make shows like ours even better by taking our Bloomberg audience survey. Visit youtube.com/Bloomberg Podcast and click the link in our profile or community section to take the survey, which is hosted by our partners at Material. Fill it out now at youtube.com/Bloomberg Podcast. Bloomberg Surveillance today brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Trade over 10,000 U.S. stocks and ETFs, U.S. equity index options, U.S. treasuries, and more on your timetable. Learn more at ibkr.com/around the clock here. Let's talk to Lisa Pendergast, CRE, that's Commercial Real Estate Finance Council's Executive Director. Lisa, I make the mistake when I think about commercial real estate, I think office. But it's so much more than that. It's, it can be retail, it can be warehouses and all this other stuff. As you step back, where do you see the commercial real estate business today? Where are the strengths? Where are the weaknesses?
I think the strengths that we see are more in the ability sort of to withstand sort of the onslaught of Fed rate hikes, what's going on at the property level and in certain sectors like office. Much of the underwriting that we've seen coming into this cycle has been far more conservative than we have seen in the past. And I think it's appropriate given the circumstances, the fact that we've had a downturn in the economy, the change that we've seen in the office sector demand. I do think that's starting to stabilize, which is a good thing. But ultimately, we are, lending on a conservative basis to borrowers, I think, who are kind of like minds at this point as to how to proceed, and that is in a more conservative way. So to the extent that leverage is down and coverage on debt service coverage ratios on loans are much higher, those are all important factors that will allow this sector to continue first to be liquid in terms of finance and lending, and also keep our delinquency rates and the like down low to what we'd like to see historically.
Lisa, we've heard the doom and gloom about commercial real estate for some time now. I'd love to go back to September, to that Federal Reserve meeting, and maybe you could tell me what in real terms happened after the Fed cut rates. I imagine that was highly anticipated, but what did it mean for the commercial real estate sector to sort of see the Fed embark on that rate cutting cycle?
Sure. I think in many ways it's like sitting at a light and the light's red, and maybe this way we go kind of opposite and it turns yellow. It sort of was a proceed with caution kind of a thing. And I think it did lighten sort of the spirits of this market in terms of the ability to refinance loans that were done at a much lower rate and mortgage rate than what we can offer today. Having said that, if a property is performing and it's cash flowing as expected, so you have that cash flow, the Fed's ease of 50 and potentially the promise for more, although it's tough to see that it's going to be multiple 50 basis point moves go forward. The reality is the lower rate and the lower benchmark is going to allow us to refinance well-performing assets at a rate that's still going to be much higher than what it was when they originally were done. But to the extent that the cash flow coming off the property is starting to, stabilize, certainly in the office sector, and other markets have done quite well throughout coming out of COVID and currently. And so I do anticipate that we will see some rough patches in certain office properties that have really suffered in occupancy. But actually what we've seen is sort of the return to office numbers are getting better. The reality is that even if you're in the office only 2 or 3 days a week, you're paying your annual rent. And that's really what property owners on the office side would like to see, obviously. So to the extent that, you have a sort of modified full week, 2 days in the office, 3 days in the office, that still works for the office sector. And it suggests that the better office properties will kind of make their way through this issue.
Lisa, if I wanted to build an apartment building or a retail space in my local town, if I go to my local bank, are they going to fund me or do I have to go somewhere else?
That's a loaded question. I think that it depends is the answer there. It depends on sort of the statistics in that market. If you think about multifamily, we've seen a good amount of new supply come on the market. So to the extent that it is warranted in that market, that you are a borrower in good stead, that the math works for both the bank and the borrower, the lender and the borrower, then that will happen. And chances are, though, you might also want to seek a loan from, say, the GSEs, Fannie, Freddie, even Ginnie Mae to some extent, though that's a different kind of animal than what we normally see in lending. So those are 35, 40-year fully amortizing loans on the Ginnie Mae front. But you could go to the agencies and you could, go to your local bank. I guess the concern is sort of multifamily and where we are in that sector. It is a sector that historically has always been very stable. And yet I do believe, like during COVID, we've seen more production, more supply in multifamily. And in certain markets, that has become a problem. However, I feel like it's starting to moderate, that new product is being absorbed. And for now, the multifamily market is performing reasonably well. If you just look at sort of, cap rates, for example, on multifamily right now, they're around 5.5% or so. And if you look at multifamily delinquencies, really within the CMBS market, they're quite low at around 3.4% or so. And, I'll take that all day long in terms of compared to what we'll see in the office market where those numbers were higher. They're now around 8.4% or so. But they certainly have been higher coming out of COVID and the like.
Lisa, we got about a minute left, and we can't escape this campaign. Here we are 11 days out from Election Day. I know you've done a scenario analysis of sort of what each election outcome might mean. Digging into that, I'm curious. I looked at your analysis and I saw this kind of regulatory matrix at the end, noting sort of when the leaders of these regulatory agencies are leaving, when their terms are up, et cetera. Very quickly here, sort of how much of a difference is that likely to make for commercial real estate, sort of change or undulations in the leadership at those major regulatory agencies in D.C. after this election?
I do think that from a regulatory perspective and who heads some of those agencies, like the SEC, for example, which is an agency that we, deal with directly often, it's going to matter to some extent. Yes, if a Republican is in the White House, I suspect that would probably be favorable or at least status quo for our market and financial markets in general. And then also, who knows on the other side, if a Kamala Harris gets in, it could be not all that different either. It would probably be the same. So you probably would keep those same heads of those agencies in place. And to the extent then it would be just more of the same. We've had great conversation and good relationships with the regulators in terms of doing our best to very much understand their goals and trying to meet those goals.
Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate getting your thoughts and analysis of the commercial real estate business. That's Lisa Pendergast. She's Executive Director for the Commercial Real Estate Finance Council. I'm just wondering, like when a big office building on 3rd Avenue trades, at what discount will it be to pre-pandemic levels? 10, 20, 30, 50%, 60%? I don't know. We'll have to see. More coming up. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures right now pointing to a higher open on Wall Street. Investors looking past that jump in borrowing costs that cooled market sentiment earlier this week. So right now we have NASDAQ futures up 0.3%, 76 points. We have Dow futures up 0.2%, 90 points. S&P futures up 0.3%, 17 points. The 2-year yield at 4.06%. That's up down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.20%, and that is little change. Have to point out Bitcoin down about 0.1% at around 68,000. Shares of Apple down nearly 1%. This was after it was downgraded by KeyBank. It's questioning its growth expectations. And we have some executive news. You have Morgan Stanley CEO Ted Pick becoming chairman of the board in January, replacing James Gorman, who you know has been named chair of the board at Walt Disney. And we told you earlier how Elon Musk's wealth soared after those blowout earnings from Tesla. Well, it's also a big day for the head of Microsoft. CEO Satya Nadella received a pay package worth more than $79 million this year. That was a 63% increase from the prior year. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
To my mind, Satya Nadella is the most unheralded superstar of Silicon Valley. I don't think he gets any of the press that Zuckerberg gets or Elon gets, and he has just done a phenomenal job, I think, there. So
and been there a while.
Been there a while.
Staying power as well.
So $74 million. I don't know. He's created a ton of shareholder value. We'll have to see. Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciated that. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. We're also streaming live on YouTube, so check us out there. Economic indicators today brought to you by BNY. BNY's expertise and insights can help clients achieve their ambitions. Visit bny.com. All right, 11 days to the election. I'll tell you, we've got ex-presidents out there on the stump. We've got ex-secretaries of state out there. We've got all kinds of stars out there. We got the boss out there. Who we don't have out there is President Biden that much. I wonder what the strategy is there. Joe Mathieu joins us. He's host of Bloomberg's Balance of Power. Joe, are the folks in D.C., are they a little surprised that we haven't seen more of President Joe Biden out on the campaign trail?
That would be a no.
Okay.
Typically, look, this is like a push and pull. There's sometimes a benefit to appearing with the incumbent in this case, and that's confused because they're in the same administration.
Right.
Well, go back to any campaign cycle. There's usually a reason for the president to stay home, depending on the state. That's, unfortunately for Joe Biden, I guess, most states. He's still being used in Pennsylvania in some areas that are close to his heart, the boy from Scranton. But look, Kamala Harris is trying to carve out her own lane here. She's been very deferential to Joe Biden. She's not sought to find too much sunlight between them when it comes to policy. And she has shared a stage with him, but I don't think Joe Biden is the key to her election.
Joe, I understand why Kamala Harris is going to Georgia, why she's going to be in Michigan and Pennsylvania. Today she goes to Texas.
Yes,
help me understand why. This is not a swing state. Last I checked, it's not a contested state, although I think there are a lot of Texas Democrats who would like to believe that it is or could be. What is she doing there?
They're both there, in fact. And so consider that. They're both in Texas, which is not a swing state, with 11 days to go here, and you start scratching your head. She's going to Houston. She's going to be there with Beyonce. And it has a lot to do with the issue of reproductive rights. She's going to Texas to make a stand on the abortion ban there and use that as a backdrop to make an argument, and showing off with Beyonce, I suppose, can't hurt. Willie Nelson will be there as well, we understand. Donald Trump, meantime, is going to Austin. Also, not exactly Trump country if you're going to go anywhere in Texas, but he's there to do an interview with Joe Rogan for his podcast. That was scheduled, and there'll be a rally thereafter that was scheduled after it was known that Kamala Harris was going to be there. We keep seeing this over and over again. You guys were mentioning earlier, Donald Trump, Madison Square Garden in a few days. Not a swing state. In New York, he went to Coachella. And it starts to beg the question, does it matter? Do you have to be on the ground in Michigan this whole time, or is it about getting earned media in what is a national election?
Elon Musk, boy, he's been a high profile. I mean, he's high profile.
Notable Austin resident, we should say, too.
Oh, that's a very good point. Exactly. He's a relo. Do we have any sense, Joe, what kind of impact he's having, if at all, on this process?
It's a little bit difficult to tell. I mean, we talk about celebrity. Let's include him. We were talking about one of the most famous people in the world, certainly the wealthiest person in the world, and he's on stage with Donald Trump while Beyonce and the boss are with Kamala Harris. Consider which one might be more potent. He's certainly given him a lot more money than Beyonce is giving to the Harris campaign, but he's also essentially bankrolling and helping to run Donald Trump's ground game. And a lot of the inside narrative from the Republican Party is that's not going as well as it could be. It's a very non-traditional approach. And this is one of the things, if Donald Trump wins, they're going to say this was genius. If he loses, they're going to say, I told you so. And it does just bring up a whole new set of questions in a campaign that is, frankly, original. We're seeing, if I could use a word from Tom Keene, we're seeing things in this campaign that we've just not seen before in modern politics.
I wanted to ask you about polling. And so, I was on the air a lot yesterday talking about our poll with Morning Consult, which showed this 49-49 deadlock. Today, the New York Times and Siena College are out with their poll, 48-48, very similar there. Something I kept hearing, with all due deference and goodwill toward our colleagues there in the Bureau with you who put this poll together and analyze it, isn't this just telling us what we already know? How are you at this point in the campaign, Joe, looking at each of these polls individually, all of them in complement? What are they telling you? When you get those crosstabs, when you're thumbing through them, what are you looking for in particular?
Well, it's a great question. It does tell us what we already know, but then even more than we knew it. I mean, this thing is tied up in a way that it wasn't even at the beginning of October. That Siena New York Times poll you mentioned, that's 48-48. We had 49-49. That's pretty interesting, guys, to have two major polls like that find such a similar finding and be so consistent over the weeks. But Kamala Harris lost 4 or 5 points in that Siena poll since the beginning of October, which is why Democrats, many of whom believe Donald Trump is undersampled, are freaking out right now. This is why on Monday morning people woke up and said, my God, this isn't the race that we wanted. Donald Trump actually might really be headed for a win here, and so we're pulling out the stops. It's about turnout. It really is, even though that's a cliche. But inside that poll, there were a couple of noteworthy items. Donald Trump is still beating Kamala Harris by 5 points when it comes to the economy. Though interestingly, guys, a plurality of voters who we spoke with in the swing states, these are likely voters, still believe Kamala Harris will win. And you wonder, as voters like to pick a winner, as they say, that has some self-fulfilling prophecy to it.
Hey, Joe, has much been made in this campaign about age with Biden versus Harris? I haven't seen it talked about that much. I'm wondering if that's part of the strategy, or they just a missed opportunity? I'm not sure what.
Well, if you mean Trump versus Harris, the Harris campaign is really trying to go there. They're trying to use that as a cudgel the way Trump did against Biden. It has not stuck in the same way. And they've really been talking about this a lot more openly. Kamala Harris has a whole part of the stump speech that's on the rambling rallies and the crazy stuff, the Arnold Palmer thing, the references to Silence of the Lambs. I mean, it's been, in some cases, going off the rails, the use of swear words and the weave, as Donald Trump calls it, ping-ponging from issue to issue, sounding like a non sequitur at times. But he's not Joe Biden. People see him as energetic. Maybe it's the makeup. I mean, look, the guy just keeps on going, even though there have been reports out there that he's, quote unquote, exhausted. They've been hitting that hard, too. Voters just see him differently than they see Joe Biden, even though he's only a couple of years apart from him. Has a lot to do with, I guess, the way we all age individually.
Joe, let me ask you lastly, sort of what you're hearing from guests on your show who are not politicians or analysts, but are kind of squarely in the world of knowing both Wall Street and Washington. I had a conversation yesterday with John Authers about the so-called Trump trade and talked a bit about sort of what it means. And we went through all the various scenarios of what Wall Street is expecting or thinks might happen in terms of who might win the White House and who might win the House and the Senate and what that means. Can you distill for us what you're hearing from your guests about that sort of, I know there is this kind of wide divide now between the betting markets and what polls are telling us. What can we divine from that? What is that gap telling us just about perceptions and sort of how people are looking at this election?
Well, if it comes to the poly market, I mean, some interesting reporting yesterday that it was a single French whale, as they called him. It sounds like an illicit menu item, who had like 4 accounts that was dumping all kinds of money in poly market that helped to skew those numbers a little bit. this has become a real partisan thing. You start talking polymarket, you start getting angry tweets for some reason, because a lot of Trump supporters think that the mainstream media is trying to denigrate what is a useful tool here, not taking it seriously, even though the pollsters, they say, always get it wrong. Look, the fact of the matter is there's no methodology to a market like that. There's no sample size, and it's really pretty difficult to compare betting markets with political polls. Maybe you want to throw them both out at this point. I don't know, but they are pretty different animals. The way Wall Street is viewing this, though, I do find pretty interesting. It's pretty clear that Wall Street has a bit of an allergy to the idea of a Harris administration because it would come with a higher corporate tax rate, higher capital gains taxes. They can't get a straight answer on unrealized gains. And they know that Donald Trump wants to cut corporate taxes and pretty much all taxes by the sound of things. And they don't seem to mind the increased deficit that would likely come with that, or even potential inflationary pressures here. Animal spirits is all I keep hearing in the analyst notes here. That's what we have heard from many on Wall Street. So that's the bias in the market. Then again, you start looking at where the donations are coming from, and look at how Wall Street has performed under Democratic administrations historically, and you wonder.
Very good. Joe, thanks once again for giving us a couple minutes of your time. Joe Mathieu, he's the host, folks, of Bloomberg's Balance of Power. Check that out at noon every day and at 5 p.m. as well, all Wall Street time. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul, David, and Lisa. Vice President Kamala Harris entering her final sprint of the campaign, joining forces with Beyonce in the Lone Star State later today. Harris says Texas is ground zero for the fight over abortion. Last night, with former President Obama also joining her on stage, Harris at an Atlanta area rally warned the crowd so much is on the line in this election. The vice president pointing to the words of former Trump White House Chief of Staff John Kelly.
Take a moment to think about what that means. That Trump said, quote, Hitler did some good things. And that Trump wished he had generals like Hitler's who would be loyal to Trump and not to America's Constitution.
Trump now firing back, calling Kelly a man of rather low intelligence. The former president, speaking at an event held by conservative group Turning Point Action in Las Vegas last night, told supporters that when it comes to immigrants in the U.S. illegally who commit violent crimes, he'd use a law that goes back to the 18th century.
I will invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798.
Speaking about immigration, he compared the U.S. to a garbage can. The Gaza Health Ministry says Israeli strikes have killed 38 people in Gaza and 3 journalists in Lebanon today. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is meeting in London today with officials from Lebanon, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates as he continues to push for an end to the fighting in the region. Blinken said he's intensely engaged in achieving real security along the Lebanon-Israel border.
We want to see civilians protected. We want to make sure that Lebanese armed forces are not caught in the crossfire.
Blinken said the U.S. does not want to see a protracted campaign against Hezbollah in Lebanon by Israel. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Paul, David, Lisa.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Bloomberg Surveillance brought to you by IBKR with Interactive Brokers Forecast. A trader, you can trade your views on the 2024 elections. Just answer yes or no. Visit ibkr.com/forecast and get started today. David Gura, Brooklyn, big Halloween thing.
Oh my gosh,
the kids
it's
are out
in
and about.
full effect, and I think in every neighborhood it's a real scene in Brooklyn. But I'm impressed by I think maybe it's some election fatigue. People are devoting more attention and time to buying decorations and putting up than they have in the past. But it is always a scene, and I think this year will be, if the weather holds, especially good.
Yeah, because I was walking around Brooklyn last night. I try to not go there too often because it's too hip for me. But and it was great decorations.
Yes.
The folks had just looking
skeletons
great out there
everywhere.
Yeah, so I kind of feel like, boy, this is going to be a happening spot on Halloween. So we'll have to see. But we'll check it out. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have futures advancing in early trading to end off the week with big earnings week winding down. While traders are now turning to eco data next week. We have the October jobs report in focus. Today, though, we did get some more economic data. We got durable goods orders for September. The expectation was for a drop of 1%, came in at a drop of 0.8%. At 10 a.m. Wall Street time, we'll get a read on sentiment from the University of Michigan. All right, so we have NASDAQ futures up 0.4%, 98 points. Dow futures up 0.2%, 114 points. S&P futures up 0.3%, 22 points. And this news coming across the terminal, the New York Stock Exchange extending trading on its ARCA equities venue to 22 hours on weekdays. Over to the bond market. The 2-year yield, 4.04%. That's down 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.18%. And that's down 2 basis points. Shares of Capital One, they're up about 3%. An earnings beat for the bank that's looking to acquire Discover. And you have shares of Spirit Air. They were up 7%, now up 16%. Word that it plans to sell planes worth about $500 million to help boost cash as it nears that possible bankruptcy filing. And I thought this was pretty cool. Tesla said to open a 50s diner-themed charging station in Los Angeles. EV drivers, they can grab a bite, catch a movie while they're topping off their battery. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, streaming live on YouTube as well. You know, coming out of the pandemic, one of the most interesting healthcare kind of stories has been these GLP-1
huge stories.
It's just extraordinary. Yeah. I know a couple of people that are using them, and the effects have been dramatic. I mean, almost life-changing, and it's no joke. I want to get a sense of kind of where we are in this whole process and where we go from here. George Hampton joins us. He's the president and CEO of Curax Pharmaceuticals. George, thanks so much for joining us here. Again, it's been such an amazing story in the pharma space, these GLP-1 drugs here. Kind of, can you give us a sense of, again, just kind of where we are in the evolution of this therapeutic and maybe kind of where we go over the next couple of years?
Sure, and good morning. Yeah, and importantly, Curax doesn't have a GLP-1. We have different types of weight loss medications that we've had on the market for some time. But the GLP-1s have really changed the entire landscape of weight loss treatment, right? And that's for a couple of reasons. One, they're fantastic products, and you know that because you're seeing that, as you said, in your friends and family. Two, they've been brought to market by two very, very large companies, and one of those companies is a great American company, Lilly, that comes in with all of the kind of surrounds its medicines with all the services and patient support that's necessary really to help patients have a better results with the medication. And so this has put the spotlight on obesity, and with America being 40+% obese just in the adults, there's a huge need here.
Tell us about the drug that you manufacture, that's Contrave, and sort of how that fits into this kind of broader complement of drugs geared toward people who have obesity or struggling with obesity.
Yeah, so Contrave is not a GLP-1 and works completely different, which is important because with a disease like obesity that's very, very complex, has multiple reasons that it presents in each individual person, you need to have choice. And so doctors, and you'll see this in the literature, say one size doesn't fit all. You can't just have a new product like a GLP-1 and think that's going to cover everyone. And so Contrave, with a different method of action, is being used in patients that either fail GLP-1s or present with certain symptoms. Contrave works in the brain centrally as opposed to the GLP-1s that work in the gut. And so if a person has irrational cravings for food, maybe they're stressed or something else is driving food cravings, we help control the dopamine release and the feeling of a high that a person gets when they eat. And so it's a completely different mechanism of action, and physicians have needed to have, in every disease state, multiple medications in multiple classes in order to control diseases.
So, George, you mentioned kind of the high rates of obesity here in the U.S., and the GLPs are one tool to kind of deal with that. But that feels to me kind of temporary. If one were to go off their GLP-1 regimen, presumably some or all of the weight would come back. I don't know how that really plays out. Is there a longer-term, more fundamental treatment for obesity that's either here in the market or something that you and others are working towards?
There's 70 programs in clinical development right now. And so it's one of the most active, if not the most active clinical landscape right now. And so there's a lot of interest because the market is very big, and the problem is our number one epidemic nationally. And so a lot of people are interested in it. And there's everything from GLP-1s to other types of controlled substances to medical devices that are being approached. And I'm sure that there's someone working on gene therapy or cell therapy to make positive changes in the disease. It's going to be that way probably for the next decade as we bring new products to market. When you do go off your medication, whether it's Contrave or off of a GLP-1, you are likely to gain the weight back because obesity is a chronic disease. And so it's not different from hypertension or diabetes or osteoporosis in that you have a disease and you need to treat it and control it. And if medication works, then that's a medication you should stay on until your doctor tells you not to.
George, I'd love to pull back and get a sense from you of how the pharmaceutical industry is doing at this point in time. We hear so much about prices and the conversation happening between companies and lawmakers about what prices should be. I know that yours is a company that doesn't do, as I understand it, a whole lot of development on your own. You're acquiring pharmaceuticals that have been developed elsewhere. What has the environment for that been like in recent years? Can you kind of situate the pharmaceutical industry and the broader economy right now, as we've talked about, what have been headwinds to so many different industries, chiefly, higher interest rates?
Well, there's a lot packed in there. There's the pricing issue, right? And so that's gotten the attention of some lawmakers recently as it pertains to the GLP-1s. Even the head of the FDA recently made comments about the pricing of the GLP-1 products, and so it's very much at the forefront. Our system of healthcare delivery on the commercial side definitely requires a higher price because of all the middlemen in the middle, and I think that's been established. We haven't had the ability as a country or as a legislative body to do anything about it yet, but I think it's working its way there. As far as the landscape, you're right. We buy products that are already commercialized, and then we'll do things like life cycle management. So if there's better ways to deliver the medication, we'll create new delivery systems. And we have 31 SKUs at this point, and we're 5+ years in business. And we're very active in the M&A space. What we're seeing out there are any number of companies that have either run out of capital, unable to get cheap capital, or are unable to acquire new products to kind of fill their revenue or fill their pipeline. And so we like talking to those companies to see what opportunities there are to merge or acquire them.
George, Lisa from New Jersey emails in, and she asks a question I think a lot of people are thinking about is, when will a GLP pill be available? What's the feeling within the industry these days? Because that was seen by a lot of folks as kind of the next step in the adoption.
So if a GLP-1 pill already exists for type 2 diabetes, right? And so right now multiple companies are working on a GLP-1 pill for weight loss. And so there are a number of programs that are in phase 3 that you could see these products, anytime depending on the FDA's opinion of these products, once the clinical trials are done, anywhere from 12 to 36 months.
Interesting. All right, that'll be a big thing. Hopefully some lower side effects too, because I know a lot of folks are complaining about the nausea associated with the injection. So the obesity problem in the United States, we all know that this is a significant healthcare issue. Lots of smart folks working on it. The GLP-1 drugs for a lot of folks are, a big step forward, but some more work being done on some longer term, perhaps therapies as well. George Hampton, President and CEO of Curex Pharmaceuticals, joining us. Thank you so much for your time. Because again, the folks I know that are on them, they work significantly, but the nausea is a
huge hurdle for a lot of people. And just can't understate how this has proliferated across the country. So many people using these medications.
Yeah, when you see billboards in Times Square for some of these things, that's a big deal. So all right, we're gonna have more coming up. Little Eddie Money for you, taking you out of this segment. This is Bloomberg.
Take me home tonight. I don't wanna let you go tonight.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, we have David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, streaming live on YouTube as well. Coming up, we're going to check in with Margaret Brennan, CBS Face the Nation, see what they've got coming up for their program. Jennifer Lee, senior economist at BMO Capital Markets. We'll get her thoughts on the economy going forward. It's Friday. It's football season. Andrew Orrick, head coach of Harvard football, on this week's game. I think they beat Holy Cross last weekend. They're going to play back into the Ivy League this week, so we'll check in with Coach Orrick and get a sense of what's happening with our friends at Harvard football. We cover Harvard football. We broadcast Harvard football, 92.9 FM, big signal up in Boston every week. So that's a good stuff. Right now, let's kick things off with Miss Lisa Mateo with the Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa.
And we've got green on the screen as we close out a busy week of earnings. Today, we've heard from Colgate-Palmolive. Shares were up 2%, now down about 2%. They reported a third quarter earnings beat. Then you have New York Community Bank Corp. Their shares down nearly 8%. Guidance for net interest income, earnings per share for 2024-2025, well, they were below what Wall Street expected. Right now, we have NASDAQ futures up 0.5%, 112 points. Dow futures up 0.2%, 121 points. We have S&P futures up 0.3%, or 22 points. We have the 2-year yield 4.04%. That's down 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.19%. That's down 2 basis points. Oil resuming its advance after a 2-day drop. Right now we have Brent crude up more than 1% at $75 a barrel. WTI crude $71 a barrel. We have spot gold at $2,730 an ounce. Shares of Capri Holding down 47%. The reason why? Well, a federal judge blocked its planned $8.5 billion takeover of rival retailer Tapestry. They do Coach and Kate Spade. Tapestry up about 13%. And shares of Apple down nearly 0.5%. It was downgraded by KeyBank as it questions its growth expectations. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. Bloomberg Surveillance today. It is brought to you by Interactive Brokers Portfolio Analysts. Consolidate and analyze all your financial accounts on one powerful dashboard for free. Sign up for Portfolio Analyst at ibkr.com/free PA. 11 days to the selection, someone told me. I think that's happening out there. I'm guessing our good friends at CBS News are paying attention to this stuff. Margaret Brennan joins us. She's the host of Face the Nation. You can listen to see Face the Nation Sunday mornings at CBS Television Network. You can hear it on Bloomberg Radio 92.9 FM up in and across all of Bloomberg here. Margaret, talk to us about how are you covering this election 11 days out come this Sunday morning? How are you going to feature it on Face the Nation?
This Sunday on Face the Nation, we're going to be speaking to Vice Presidential candidate J.D. Vance. I'm headed out to Erie, Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, to talk to him. That's one of the places he's really hoping to make a final argument. That state could be so decisive. It has 19 electoral votes, and it's the 270 number we're focused on, not that popular vote at this point. We'll also have Liz Cheney on the program to respond, lifelong conservative who's making the argument to fellow conservatives that the Trump-Vance ticket is an assault, is dangerous to democracy, and if you have, positions that perhaps you can't quite reconcile with the Democratic ticket, maybe put that aside in the what she argues in the interest of furthering democracy. It's a really fascinating dynamic in this campaign that you have conservatives campaigning for Democrats, but that is where we are in America 2024.
Margaret, something you and your colleagues have been doing, and I think it's so great, is talking to these secretaries of state in swing states across the country. You had Brad Raffensperger of Georgia on last weekend and Jocelyn Benson of Michigan, and something that stood out from Mr. Raffensperger to me was his assertion that the equipment is working. He's saying that things are going as they should be going. I know you've got 2 more coming up this weekend as well. Put all of it together for us. We see kind of astonishing numbers in North Carolina and Georgia of folks who are voting early. Is the general sense that this is proceeding apace and going well? And what, if anything, is giving these secretaries of state pause as we look ahead to November the 5th?
Well, that's exactly what we're intending to do, level set. That's why I want to go to these top election officials. It's the state, not the federal government, that administers federal elections. And so talking to them about what they've changed from 2020 to now, how quickly the processing will be, what can you anticipate? That's what I want to learn from these two election officials who, by the way, have agreed to go on with each other, one Democrat, one Republican, arguing that they are in a role that is apolitical and they want to shore up confidence among American voters that the process is working despite these campaigns, information warfare being waged against local election officials. And you saw that take a really dangerous turn. Just this past week, the Department of Justice brought federal charges against individuals in Pennsylvania and Arizona for death threats made to people who are just trying to organize election officials and be part of this very essential process in our democracy. So these folks who you might not in the past have followed in terms of how they run your local election are really on the front lines here. And that's why we want to turn to them to answer those questions you've raised. And
you've asked them, and I'll let Paul jump back in here, but the question you've asked all of them is, depending on the outcome, are you going to certify these results no matter who wins the race? And I know last week they both said yes, and I suspect you'll ask the same question this weekend.
Absolutely. And that doesn't mean you won't see litigation in the days after the election. That could draw out some uncertainty, but certainly for those who are administering things, we have to trust the system.
Margaret, I think, in most years we all kind of grew up and we kind of knew by 10 or 11 o'clock at night who won the election. I understand that may not be the case this time. How are you at CBS News thinking about how this might play out over the coming days after the election?
Well, unless we see some blowout lead, right? And that's not expected, right? Our polling to date leads us to the expectation that this neck and neck race will remain that way, and that this could be a win decided on the margins, on these small numbers of vote count differences. And so that is why there's the expectation that it could take a while. It's not that the process isn't working, it's that it's, one of the reasons you could in the past call a direction, right, even before the votes themselves were certified, is because you saw a tremendous lead. When you don't have a tremendous lead, when it's a difference of thousands of votes, that isn't so clear, right? You literally do have to wait till every vote is counted and certified. So that's why we are in this more drawn out period of time in a divided America. That is what is creating the environment for this. And then one of the things we know has happened from 2020 is improvements in the process, or early voting started in places like, for example, last weekend in Detroit, they had voting on Saturday. They're trying to start some of these cities and places a little bit earlier, or change processes to make them more efficient, because there's this danger in an information vacuum of having that void filled by lies, by distortion. And so there's a lot of pressure, frankly, on these frontline officials to come to a bottom line pretty quickly, because the longer it's up in the air, the more our adversaries can exploit that, as we heard from the Director of National Intelligence this past week, but also people who just want to be bad actors and manipulate your brain, hack your brain here on the front at home.
Margaret, last question here. This isn't my first rodeo or yours either. You've covered a lot of these campaigns, and there's something unique about, there's a lot that's unique about this one. But one thing is in the kind of push, this last push to Election Day, the way that these candidates are approaching campaigning. And so we've talked a lot about the celebrities that the Harris campaign has brought to bear. We've talked about Donald Trump's kind of discursive remarks, and I guess could be construed as a closing statement going into November the 5th. Mm-hmm. I'll put a question to you that I put to Joe Mathieu, our colleague in Washington, D.C., which is, why is Texas the place that these two candidates are going to today? I guess as we talk about this race being so close, but in the CBS News poll, in the Bloomberg Morning Consult poll, in the New York Times Siena College poll, everything is so close and within the margin of error. Are these campaigns just trying whatever novel approach they can here? What do you make of them going to Texas at this point in time?
beyond the Beyonce factor for
lest I forget the Beyonce factor.
President Harris. Right. No, you raise a great point. In some of these places, it's not so much about winning as it is about losing by less, if that makes sense. Certainly for Democrats, particularly in rural areas, that's been part of the strategy for the Harris campaign to try to eat at the margins that we've been talking about. There are also, for example, in Texas, the thematics of the campaign for Harris, reproductive health care rights, are at the front of her argument to all voters, but also female voters, about why they need to show up. And Texas is one of those examples of a place with restrictions. But you also, by the way, have Senate races underway. Okay. And just a reminder that, that those could be handcuffs or those could be green lights for whoever the next president of the United States is.
Margaret, thank you so much for joining us. That's Margaret Brennan. Margaret Brennan is host of Face the Nation on the CBS television network. You can see that this Sunday morning on the CBS television network. And you can hear Margaret Brennan this weekend on Bloomberg Radio. Listen to Face the Nation Sunday at 2 p.m. in New York, Washington, D.C., and 92.9 FM in Boston. That's Face the Nation this Sunday at 2 on Bloomberg Radio. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul, David, Lisa. With 11 days to go in one of the most topsy-turvy presidential races in recent memory, the contest couldn't be tighter between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Bloomberg's Joe Mathieu has more from Washington.
When you think about the most remarkable 3 months in modern American political history, with attempted assassinations, a change at the top of the ticket, the wild rhetoric that we've heard, this race remains tied. We told you yesterday about the Bloomberg News swing state survey, 49-49. That was our final number. Last poll before the election. Today, the New York Times and Siena College get their turn. It's 48-48. We are seeing remarkable consistency in these polls. While the race is too close to call, that's the point. They're all telling us the same thing.
Bloomberg's Joe Mathieu in the nation's capital. Eric and Lyle Menendez still have a long way to go before they can walk out of prison, even though the Los Angeles County District Attorney has recommended their life without parole sentence be thrown out and the brothers be resentenced and immediately eligible for parole. L.A. County District Attorney George Gaskin.
I have to tell you that after a very careful review of all the arguments that were made for people on both sides of this equation, I came to a place where I believe that under the law, resentencing is appropriate.
The brothers were convicted in the 1989 killings of their parents at the family's Beverly Hills mansion. Global news 24 hours a day, and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Paul, David, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Let's look at earnings here. We've had about 180 of the S&P 500 companies have reported earnings so far, David. And, I'll start with the big banks. They were pretty solid. I mean, the big banks were solid. I think we're seeing generally pretty good numbers across the board coming out of the S&P 500. Just looking sales, surprise sales will come in a little bit more than 1% better than expected. Earnings almost 6% better than expected.
And financial is something that's so integral to that Trump trade we've heard so much about, this belief that were Donald Trump to be reelected, that would lead to a lighter regulatory burden for a number of those institutions. So we've really seen them kind of rising on that expectation as well from Wall Street, as we talked about with Joe Mathieu just a little while ago.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see kind of how this plays out. But again, next week, another big week of earnings, and we'll get some more of the tech companies starting to come out next week in addition to some of the industrial companies. So we'll stay on top of the earnings like we do here at Bloomberg. We'll have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And the Bloomberg Futures Report is brought to you by IBKR. Markets never sleep, and neither does Interactive Brokers. Discover opportunities with CME Group futures across equity indices, interest rates, FX, energy, and more. Access CME futures around the clock at Interactive Brokers. All right, we have futures advancing with the S&P 500 right now up about 0.4%, suggesting it could trim its first weekly drop in 7. Now, some analysts predicting a stock market boost if Donald Trump wins a presidential vote. We've been talking about politics, while others warn it could reignite inflation, slow the pace of Fed easing. Bank of America strategists, though, say the U.S. election nears. Faith in gold and AI stocks, that is growing. We have NASDAQ futures up 0.6%, 126 points. Dow futures up 0.3%, 127 points. S&P futures up 0.4%, 23 points. The 2-year yield 4.05%. That's down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.19%. That's down 2 basis points. Shares of Mercedes down 1% in Germany. Its quarterly car-making margin fell to 4.7%. That was due to some competition in China. And Paul, you said it, Fox going to benefit from the World Series. Listen to this. It said it sold out its ad positions for the first 2 games. More spots could open up because you have pitching changes, extra innings, things like that. A 30-second spot in the first 5 games. The network has been asking for $450,000 to $500,000. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, big money, New York and LA. Why not? I mean, get premium pricing there.
Have you been? Have you ever been to a World Series game?
I have.
You have?
Yes.
Wow.
At the old Yankee Stadium.
Okay.
So it was great. So if you're going to do
You've had opportunities as a Yankees fan, I guess, to go repeatedly.
Yeah, exactly. So we've been in. So we'll see. But it's going to be great this year. Looking forward to it. We'll see how that plays out. All right. So Jennifer Lee joins us here. She's a senior economist, managing director at BMO Capital Markets. Jennifer, thanks for joining us here. It's kind of a light week a little bit for economic data, although I did see durable goods orders came in a little bit better than expected today. We'll get some UMich data at 10 a.m. Jennifer, it just seems like everybody just wants to talk about the election, so let me just throw it to you. What's your little nutshell message for your clients as they think about this election down here in the U.S.?
Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me on. So, that's an interesting question. I think our clients we're just basically telling them to, prepare for anything right now, because as you were just saying, and I'm getting heart palpitations thinking about it, it's a very, very tight race. We're obviously going to see more volatility playing out. And, because if it's super tight, whether or not we're going to see an actual real result, a clear result by the evening of November 5th, we'll have to see. But already, we already know that a lot of the parts of the economy has been already putting things on hold until they see what happens after November 5th. So that sort of reaction has already been playing out, and we're probably seeing that play out a little bit more until the turn of the year.
Let me ask you about how it's playing out in the bond market specifically. We've been talking about the Trump trade over the course of the morning, and something that's so fascinating to me is, yes, we've seen a lot of volatility in U.S. bonds, but baked into that belief on Wall Street, or in many parts of Wall Street, that Donald Trump would win this election, is a complete ignorance or blindness to what his policies would mean for the deficit. How do you square the two things? If you're looking at bonds as an investor, how do you think through sort of what the impact of, I guess, both of these presidents, because when you look at the analysis of Kamala Harris's policies as well, that would add to the deficit by several trillion as well. How do you think through that as you're looking at bonds?
It's almost like you have to think about it in stages, right? Like the automatic impact or the more immediate impact, will probably be a boost to the economy if we see corporate tax rates coming down. If you're, interest rates, or if you want to buy a car, you can deduct the interest, for example, as the Trump camp has been saying. At the same time, if you see tax hikes coming from the Kamala Harris group, then of course that's going to see slower economic growth. So I think it's more the immediate impact to what happens to the economy, and of course longer term, both candidates are not really addressing the fact that both of their policies are going to be adding to the bottom line, or whether it's like $3.5 trillion for the Democrats or potentially double that for the Republicans, that remains to be seen. But I think right now for the bond market, they're looking at, again, the immediate impact. They're also looking at the data. I don't think it's been a little bit of a surprise to see some of the data coming in for September above expected. You mentioned durable goods orders this morning, also beating expectations, the core measure particularly. at 0.5%. So that is, you tack that on to what we already saw so far, like that surprise jobs report for September. We'll get the next one we'll get the October one next week. Retail sales were also very solid. And of course, the sticky CPI. So that also brings into question whether or not the Fed is going to, or how aggressive they're going to be going forward.
Tariffs. That seems to be an economic discussion point for both campaigns. I kind of grew up in the world of A, they don't really work. They're not that effective. And B, they're kind of just, at the end of the day, a tax on the U.S. consumer. But I feel like I'm in the minority now. It seems like both parties are, to varying degrees, are embracing tariffs. What does your work show you about tariffs?
It will mean, at the end of the day, it will mean higher prices for the American consumer. It will mean inflation potentially is going to be heading the other way. And of course, it's going to be a brand new headache for the Federal Reserve. So that's what the big concern is that it will raise taxes, or not taxes, it will raise prices for Americans and make things that much more expensive. So that is, of course, the immediate problem. And of course, all the retaliatory measures that could bring about, if country A is tariffing country B, and country B is going to tariff you right back, that's also going to bring, broader global growth. It's going to slow broader global growth as well. So all things start to slow down, and that is not good news.
Next week, jobs. At least 3 of the 5 days we're going to be focusing on with JOLTS and with ADP and the Labor Department data at the end of the week. What are your expectations there? How are you going to be looking at those numbers? What's your sense of how the Fed is going to be looking at those numbers? Again, there's this adamance that they're not data point driven; they are data driven. How do they regard what we're going to see next week?
So it's almost like you have to look at the overall trend, right? And as shocked as all of us were with that September jobs report, we're going to have to see how October plays out, whether or not there's going to be a revision, if it's going to be downward. But October is also going to be uber messy. We are actually only looking for like 140,000 gain, but you've got all these external factors kicking and playing in, all the different hurricanes, Helene, of course, and Milton, the Boeing strike, which is dragging on, the East Coast worker strike, even though it was only like a few days long, but that had an impact. So there's a lot of noise going on. So we'll always have to go through a lot of the underlying details to see what was up and what was down in order to get a true measure of or true feeling of what happened or how the labor market is holding up. And of course, we'll have, as you mentioned, the jobs report, the JOLTS measure, the ADP as well, just to give us a hint. Initial claims so far have been fairly well behaved, even with all this noise. So it seems to us that the job market is overall still in pretty decent shape, and that's good enough for the U.S. consumer and good enough for the U.S. economy.
Jennifer, you're up in Toronto with the Bank of Montreal. How's the economy in Canada these days?
Less resilient. So whenever we're talking about the U.S., and for me, like I always talk about how resilient the U.S. is, and it's the R word and not the other R word. And Canada is a little bit less so the case. We're sort of, it's almost like we're going down this path of slower growth, but we're not falling off the path. It's almost like it's up and down. And we just got some pretty decent numbers this morning. So it shows that we could actually see some growth as the summer wrapped up, but it's not strong enough for the Bank of Canada to get off of that rate cutting path. We just cut 50 basis points this week, a total of 125 basis points, by the way, so far this year, which is the most of all the major central banks so far this year. So we have inflation well below target, but again, growth is slow, growth is sluggish. It's because of the consumer, high interest rates, mortgage rates, and housing in general. So that is slowing the Canadian economy down significantly, or enough for the Bank of Canada to continue cutting rates. Maybe not as quickly or just at a faster pace, by the way, than what we were seeing from the Fed.
All right, Jennifer Lee, thank you so much for joining us. Jennifer Lee, we always appreciate getting a few minutes of her time. She's a senior economist. She's a managing director at BMO Capital Markets, BMO, Bank of Montreal. They're located in Toronto.
Aha.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm fascinated. We had a guest on earlier based in Montreal, lives in Montreal, raising her family French.
Yeah.
I'm just fascinated by the whole dynamic up there in Canada. The French have that little enclave in Quebec, but they're so adamant and so strong in their feelings about their French identity versus the rest of the country.
We went to Quebec City in February, which is very cold, but saw it there as well, manifest just from the food to the culture, of course, to the language. Incredible to see that.
Yeah, it's just that's one of the things I want to do. I'd love to do like a long weekend in Quebec City. Everybody says that's really
Beautiful
cool, and it's
place.
super easy to get to here from New York. But I just think that whole Canadian thing is kind of fascinating. So I'm going to try to get up there. We appreciate always checking in with Jennifer Lee at BMO Capital Markets. S&P 500 It's up 23 points. We'll get this market open for you in just a moment. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And the opening bell report brought to you by BNY. BNY's expertise and insights can help clients achieve their ambitions. Visit BNY.com. All right, quite a busy week of earnings. Today we heard from Colgate-Palmolive, New York Community Bancorp, but we also had mixed data on America's economy. Factory orders for durable goods dropped for a second month of September. Declining commercial aircraft orders, that offset an increase in business equipment. Meantime, economists at a Bloomberg survey, they nudged U.S. economic growth projections higher through early next year, and that was led by consumer demand. Let's get to the markets as we kick things off right now. We'll start with the S&P 500, up 0.4%, 26 points at 5,837. The Dow up 0.3%, 152 points at 42,518. We have the Nasdaq up 0.6%, 108 points at 18,500. 2,525. The 2-year yield, 4.04%. That's down 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.18%. That's down 3 basis points. We have Brent crude, $75 a barrel. That's up nearly 1.5%. WTI crude, $71 a barrel. And we have spot gold at $2,729 an ounce. At the open, I also want to check in with Apple. Their shares a little changed right now, and this is after getting a downgrade from analysts at KeyBank. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Poland. And David, back to you.
All right, Lisa, Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, streaming live on YouTube as well. So go to youtube.com, search Bloomberg Podcast. Back in the day when I was a sell-side analyst, you went to Boston 3-4 times a year to shill for your II votes, which I got, by the way. I owned that town for a long time. One of the places you went was Wellington Management. I mean, solid, old money, crusty New York money. That's where you went. Some smart people there. I never got off on the fixed income floor. I went straight to the equity floor.
Elevator didn't stop there.
Yeah, no, that's too much math. Brij Khurana joins us. He's a senior managing director, and he's a fixed income portfolio manager at Wellington Management. Hey, Brij, is our Federal Reserve going to cut interest rates in November? Because I'm looking at some of this economic data, even like the industrial production numbers that came out today, pretty solid across the board. What do you think our Fed's going to do?
Thanks for having me back. Yeah, I do think they are going to cut about another 25 basis points in November. You know, why has the Fed changed its rhetoric to focus so much on the unemployment rate from focusing on inflation? I really think it comes from their change in view. They have this line that they've been repeating quite often, that the labor market is not the source of the inflation in the economy. And that is their biggest fear, because that's what the 1970s was about, the wage price spiral. And now they don't believe, and they're right about that, I think, that the leads speak to the labor market not being the reason we have inflation in the economy, and that means that they can go back to their pre-COVID policy of targeting the neutral rate for the economy, which they think is about 3%. That's the level where they don't think policy is expansionary, they don't think it's contractionary, and they're looking at the economy and they say, look, interest rates are at 5%, we think 3% is neutral, we have a lot of room to cut, and we're still in restrictive territory. So I think they're going to continue along this path with that 25 basis point cut.
For a neophyte like myself who has heard of R-Star but just doesn't understand the intricacies of it, how difficult is it for them to target this, and how much disagreement is there among policymakers on that committee about what it is?
So it's very hard to know. You only know when you're either
not
above
in
it
real
or below
time,
it, right? You don't know in real time. What you can do is you can look at their estimates. So you go to that dot plot that we all talk about, look at where their long-term dot is. It's around 3%. And there's actually a lot of, that's the spot where there's most consensus on. So they think it's around 3%. But I don't think that really matters whether or not it's 3, 3.5, or 2.5. The point is that they're at 5, and they're dealing with an inflation story which is less pronounced than it was 2 years ago. And so they're basically saying, okay, maybe it's 3.5. Let's see what the economy looks like when we get down to that 3.5 level. If it's still accelerating at that point, then yes, maybe the neutral rate is higher. But we just know that we're much higher than that at this point.
All right, so if I'm in the fixed income business today, I don't know. I don't have to be a rock star. I can sit in a 2-year treasury and get.
You could get off on that floor.
I can get off on that floor and say, "Hey, kids, I'm long the 2-year treasury. I'm clipping a 4.05% coupon. Should I just do that, or should I take some credit risk?"
Yeah, I mean, I do think that bonds are attractive. I do think that when you look at credit spreads, they are quite tight right now. So investment grade spreads, looking at the Bloomberg indices, less than 100 basis points, high yield spreads below 300 basis points. That is not a lot of compensation for the risks that are out there. I mean, we are in the first quintile of spreads, and historically over the next 3 to 4 years, that does mean negative excess returns for credit sectors. And I do think we actually are seeing defaults and the distressed exchange ratio, which is basically when your bonds get primed by other borrowers. And so, we're seeing that increase. It's around 5.6% right now, which is actually quite high. And so, relative to defaults and recovery rates, we don't really feel you're being compensated very handsomely right now in credit markets.
Let me go negative here and say, were things to take a turn, were we to get this kind of phantom deep downturn or recession, how well equipped is the Federal Reserve to deal with that at this point in time? When you look at sort of the policies that they've put in place, certainly the amount of assets that they bought as well, that they're beginning to unwind. Should we be worried about what tools remain in the Fed's toolkit?
I mean, I think given where the starting point of policy rates is, they have a lot of tools. I do think that this cycle is going to be different if we do enter that downturn, in that I think as much as they're going to continue to use interest rates as the primary tool to which they change monetary policy, I think they're going to be loath to use the balance sheet as aggressively as they did after COVID. And so, I think if there is a problem in the Treasury market, I do think they'll come in and buy bonds like they did in March 2020. But I think they were roundly criticized for buying so many agency mortgage-backed securities after COVID and thereafter. And so I don't think they're going to be doing that the next round. And I do think that is an important point, though. We have been in this Goldilocks type environment, and we don't think about what's coming up. But if we do enter a recession, the Fed is not going to be as aggressive as we've seen after the GFC or after COVID. And so, credit investors should keep that in mind, that the tail is not as clipped as you may think.
September was I think the biggest month for investment grade new issuance on record. All the banks have been flooding into the market with new issues. If I'm a bond salesman at like Morgan Stanley or JP Morgan, are you guys at the top of my call list? Do you buy new issue stuff? I mean, you're Wellington. Or do I just go to all the hedge funds to buy this new stuff?
I mean, we're definitely a large asset manager, and so we certainly, do buy the IG corporate market. I do think it is interesting that we kind of entered this year thinking that net issuance, so this is not only issuance, but it's also versus redemptions, was going to be on the lighter side. We were kind of thinking 400 to 500 billion, and that was going to be kind of a tailwind to credit markets because you just have less supply than we've seen over the last few years. I've just been almost surprised by how much issuance we've seen. I think gross is 1.2, 1.3 trillion, and even net issuance is kind of 600 billion-ish. And so it definitely, I've been surprised by two things. One, the amount of supply we've seen in the investment grade corporate market, but just kind of the ravenous nature with which everyone's taking it down. And supply almost causes spreads to tighten, not widen.
Every book I see for these things, I don't care if it's Purina Cat Chow or JP Morgan, these things are oversubscribed multiple times in a bond market. I mean, I expect that from one of my IPOs back in the day because I was a great syndicate salesman. But fixed investment grade debt?
Yeah, it is interesting. I think what people are really focusing on is the high level of yields compared to the level of spreads. That's what we constantly hear. Well, spreads are tight, but yields are high on a long-term basis. I do think that, people are very focused on income right now. In fixed income, focus on the income part. I don't think people should really forget about the total return nature of fixed income, though, as well. And, I think we're talking a lot about the election these days, as I'm sure you all are. And I think in this, the market's really pricing in a large percentage of some kind of sweep. I think we should also think about the other tail, though. What if we get divided government? And in a divided government, you get that fiscal tightening. You get perhaps, slowing economic growth than we've had over the last few years. And that's an environment where, bond yields could actually fall a lot more than people think. And so, you don't want to also forget the other side where bond yields could fall.
Let me ask you one other question kind of tied to the election. And we've heard Donald Trump say he'd like to advise the Fed chair, give him his opinion on whether rates should go up or down. Going into the interview that he did with our editor-in-chief, John Micklethwaite, Betsy Stevenson was making a very strong case that shouldn't happen, that Fed independence is so important. I want to get your perspective, sort of the market perspective on that. I think part of what she was conveying in her comments was the bond market in this country is propped up and fortified by the fact that the Fed has independence. Are folks like you thinking about this, worried about this? How much do you give credence to what the former president has been saying about taking on that kind of new advisory role were to be reelected?
Yeah, I do think central independence is extremely important, and bond markets are good at pricing that in. And so I think one of the reasons we have seen term premium rise with how the election might play out is because when you have political influence on a central bank, you should get compensated for that risk. And so, and particularly at the back end of the curve. And so I think you're starting to see that materialize, that if this rhetoric continues and actual actions take place regarding it, you should be compensated for more yield as a result of that, almost that going back and forth on different policies and what's the president saying versus what the Fed's doing. And so I do think that term premium has increased, and that's largely as a result of that.
All right, Brij, we're going to ask you to stick around for our next segment. We have no more bond talk, thank goodness. But the reason we're going to tie it all together is because you're one of our overeducated guests, which we have plenty of. You get your undergraduate degree at Princeton, then you get an MBA at some place called Harvard. Next segment, we're talking to the head football coach at Harvard. to preview their game because we
Divided loyalty is the theme of that next block.
I think it is.
He the coach, a Princeton alumnus as well, now coaching at Harvard. Tricky.
And who are they playing this weekend?
Princeton University.
So we're going to tie all this Princeton Harvard thing together. We're going to figure out how to make that all work. It's coming up in just a moment. Right now, with our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul and David. Lisa, polls show an extraordinarily tight contest between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw says the candidates are focusing on their closing messages as they try to sway the still undecided.
Obviously, at this point, I think, for Kamala Harris, one of those strong messages that I think that her people think can move people towards her is just a reminder of just, sort of why so many people did get moved away from Donald Trump and are going to have trouble voting for him. And so I think this sort of Hitler sort of set of remarks has been obviously well-timed as far as Kamala Harris is concerned.
Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw. Democrats have been seizing on criticism from one of Trump's former aides. One-time White House Chief of Staff John Kelly claimed that Trump wanted the kind of generals Adolf Hitler had and had said the former Nazi leader did some good things. Trump denies making remarks about Hitler. The Los Angeles District Attorney has recommended that Eric and Lyle Menendez be resentenced. They're currently serving life in prison for the 1989 murders of their parents. Their lawyer, Mark Garagos, says the brothers have been doing work behind bars.
They have done some unbelievable work while in prison. Lyle has kind of taken on what's called a green space project for himself that's actually been implemented in the prison. He's graduated from the University of California and gotten a BA degree. Eric has started hospice care for inmates.
Attorney Mark Garagos spoke on ABC's Good Morning America. 4 astronauts are back on Earth after a space station mission that lasted almost 8 months, 2 months longer than expected. A SpaceX capsule carrying the crew parachuted into the Gulf of Mexico off the Florida coast before dawn. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Paul, David, Lisa.
All right, Dave, let's talk some weed here.
Okay.
Florida.
Didn't think that's where you were going, but all right.
How was that for a nice transition for you? I thought, weed is legal, New York State, New Jersey. I kind of forgot that it's not nationwide.
No.
Florida is a huge state that's got it on the ballot here. So Florida's push to legalize recreational cannabis alone is making history as the nation's most expensive ballot initiative this cycle and a costliest marijuana-related measure ever. I mean, this is a monstrous market.
Have you been to Denver lately? If you drive around Denver,
yes.
the amount of storefronts and warehouses, I mean, it's
well, if you were to
rarely see an industry that's kind of cropped up and become as large as that one. Sorry.
Wow.
Wow.
Well, how about the
late on a Friday?
How about the dispensary in Neptune, New Jersey? Not that I have any experience there, but
driven by.
But it's going to be interesting to see what happens in Florida because it's just a huge market, the whole South Florida thing. So, and if you're in that industry, you have to be in Texas, you have to be in Florida, you're already in.
You have to be in Neptune,
California.
New Jersey.
You have to be in Neptune, New Jersey, calling it out there for our friends there. So anyway, Florida, pay attention. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks ending off the week on a positive note. Traders sift through a bunch of company earnings. The S&P 500 extended gains into a second consecutive session. We have the S&P 500 up 0.6%, 39 points. The Dow up 0.3%, 161 points. The Nasdaq up 1% at 192 points. We have the 2-year yield 4.04%, down 3 basis points. A yield on the 10-year 4.19%, and that's down 2 basis points. Shares of New York Community Bank Corp down 6%, provided guidance for net interest income, earnings per share 2024-2025 that came in below Wall Street's expectations. Then you have Capital One up 8%, profit that beat estimates, strengthened its credit card, auto lending business, and finally shares of Capri Holding really taking a beating, down 45%. Federal judge blocked that planned $8.5 billion takeover by Tapestry. Speaking of which, Tapestry up 13%. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. We've got David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well, so check us out there. We still have Brij Khurana with us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. He's a fixed income portfolio manager at Wellington Management. Why is he still here? It's not because he's a great portfolio manager, because he went to college at Princeton, got his MBA at Harvard, so he has a vested interest this weekend because Princeton is going up to Harvard to play and kick off his 3 p.m. Eastern. Pregame starts at 2:45 Eastern on Bloomberg's 92.9 in Boston. And we're going to talk right now with Andrew Orrick. He's the head football coach at Harvard University. So you see how we tie it all in there, David?
Well, let me add one more wrinkle here.
Yeah, please.
Andrew Orrick, a graduate of Princeton University, and a one-time coach there as well. So this is a tricky weekend of football for a lot of the people we're talking to.
So we got a lot
morning.
of people in here with vested interest. Coach Orrick, thanks so much for joining us. I have to start off, I can't remember if I've asked you this before, but I asked this of all Princeton graduates. What is your go-to sandwich at Hoagie Haven?
Oh, that's a great question. I forget the name of it. It was basically like a bacon cheeseburger with egg on top.
See, everybody's got an answer. I don't care if you're a Nobel laureate. I don't care if you're like a triple PhD in biochemistry. You have your favorite sandwich at the Hoagie Haven. And anyway, mine's is a cheesesteak hoagie, no tomatoes, but everything else. Coach, talk to us about a Harvard football here. You had a really tight win last week over a highly ranked Holy Cross team. What did you learn from your Harvard team last weekend playing Holy Cross?
Yeah, we were very resilient. There was points in the game where we had control of the game and then kind of lost control of it. And at the end there, we had to, put together a drive offensively and then ultimately have to make the stop at the very end. But we leave that game very confident and battle-tested because we've had a number of close games this first half of the season.
Coach, talk about the difficulty of this week, and then I'm going to turn to Brij on this same question. So, as I say, you've got a lot of ties to Princeton, a lot of friends, I think, probably still on the coaching staff of that team. How does that color your expectations for the game this week, and how does it change the way that you prepare for it?
I think it gives me an advantage because I'm very familiar with what they do on offense, defense, and special teams, with it being a lot of the same staff that's there. The lines of communication with any of them really stopped when the season started because we kind of knew where we were headed anyways. So I look at it as a positive for our program.
Brij, let me ask you, so you Princeton undergrad.
Yeah.
Did you go to games a lot? Then you get your MBA at Harvard. Did you go to games there? How much is football, as you experienced, a part of life at these schools?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that much, but it was really because we didn't have a distinct rival at Princeton. So, we would have homecoming if we beat both Harvard and Yale, and Harvard and Yale could care less if they beat us or not. So, it's like that you have a Harvard-Yale game, and then you have, us
Princeton
have to.
Penn.
Yeah, exactly.
I think Princeton Penn. Where are your loyalties, Brij?
It's go Tigers.
Okay,
sorry.
All right, Coach Orrick. Well, same. We'll see. Coach, talk to us about Princeton here. What do you expect to see from this Princeton team when they come up to Harvard Stadium this weekend?
Yeah, they're going to be really motivated. Kind of alluding to what he said about they want to beat Harvard and Yale every year. But they're, a very talented team. They've done a really good job recruiting for a long time there. So, all three phases, there's a lot of talent out there. Their offensive skill is really good. Their quarterback is very athletic. Defensively, They have a very good front seven. They create a lot of takeaways, and special teams. They have a lot of athletic, fast guys running around. So it's going to be a really good challenge for us.
I've got a basic question here, and that is, how much does the kind of flavor or strategy of these teams change over time? Obviously, you're a new coach, bringing new stuff to the Harvard team, but I look back, you played it at Princeton. I think that Harvard defeated you guys 3 out of 4 times when you were there. Is the strategy fundamentally the same? Is there like a kind of Princeton football, a kind of Harvard football? How much can you shape or reshape what a team's direction or reputation is?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a kind of Harvard football and Princeton football within the past 10 years. With Coach Shirace at Princeton, what they've been doing offensively, defensively, and special teams wise. There's slight changes that happen over the years when different people are the offense coordinator, defensive coordinator, special teams coordinator, but ultimately a lot of that is pretty consistent. And Harvard, with Coach Murphy being here so long, there was a brand of football that was played here for a long time, and it was a good brand of football. That's why they had so much success. So when I got here, I wasn't trying to necessarily, whole scale change that. There's a lot of good that was part of that. So to me, it was more, my personality coming out in those different phases, but letting the coordinators, stick with what they know works and make the adjustments week by week.
Hey, Coach, in college athletics, particularly in college football and I guess basketball, the economics have really changed here. The NIL is an issue. The transfer portals are an issue. How do you at Harvard, how does the Ivy League kind of position itself in this kind of new world of collegiate athletics?
Yeah, when you're at a place like this, you're going to recruit against those FBS schools because of the brand recognition that comes with Harvard. So, you just got to be upfront of what exactly this place is and how it's different. And there's a lot of high school student athletes who want that, as opposed to the free education and the NIL opportunities. Not to say that NIL opportunities don't exist here. They're just a little bit different than those places. Because the players that we get, they want the academic challenge that they're going to get here. And they're coming here and they truly love football because they're not getting an athletic scholarship. So it's a fun group to be around that way, because I love football and I know they love football. Otherwise, they wouldn't be out there, because they could just up and leave, and there's no punishment for leaving the football program when it comes to at Harvard.
Coach, I open up the Harvard Crimson's website, and there's like a 5,000-word piece on the game this weekend. So you're getting some good press from the hometown newspaper there. Then there's a smaller piece just about the challenges of getting students to come to football games. And I don't mean to say that PR should be part of your remit, but how do you approach that? How do you generate excitement? How much do you think about the work that's underway to make football a thing, or keep football a thing at Harvard? Is it a challenge, and sort of what are you doing to gin up excitement for the team?
Yeah, I've had opportunities to get in front of large groups of students and invite them to come to games. And we've had good student support at a number of the home games, and they've done a really good job of having great energy and getting involved with the game. So praising the model, try to do as much as possible when given the opportunity to talk about how great a job they did. I'm going to make sure that they see it out there in the press.
All right, Coach, thanks so much for joining us there. Andrew Orrick, he is the head football coach at Harvard University. Princeton heads up to Harvard this weekend. Kickoff is set for 3 p.m. Eastern. Pregame starts at 2:45 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg, 92.9 in Boston. Also want to thank our good friend Brij Khurana. He is fixed income portfolio manager at Wellington Management, undergraduate at Princeton, MBA at Harvard. We tied it all in there.
Who are you going to go for?
You can go
definitely
Princeton.
Go to Princeton, but
Okay.
I live like 2 miles from the stadium, so
you should
I'm
go.
I'm going to go. Yeah.
Maybe you should go.
Yeah, no,
I mean, I'm
definitely
sure there's
go.
going to be a Princeton tailgate up
Yeah,
there.
Pre-gaming starts earlier than 2:45 for any of the.
I'll be sure to stick around for the game.
Pre-game starts up there. So I've never been to a football game at Harvard. I think I'd like to
Beautiful
go.
stadium, old stadium, yeah.
Because Princeton Stadium, Palmer Field, which was 100 and some odd years old, like they all are from the Ivy League, upgraded, redone, actually rebuilt completely, probably 10, 15 years ago, I'm guessing.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's pretty nice. But again, like all Ivy League schools, they have a challenge getting folks to the game. But it's fun. I tell you, going to a game, it's pretty interesting stuff. All right, folks, Bloomberg Sports Report, or the Bloomberg Surveillance, brought to you by Audi. Visit your Tri-State Audi dealer today and get behind the wheel of the Audi model you've always wanted. We'll have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.